The forgotten room syndrome. You remember the room, not clearly, not fully, but it lingers. A dim light, maybe yellow, a wall that felt closer than it should have, a scent you can't name, but know you've smelled before. You don't remember where it was, or when, or even why you were there. But the emotional residue won't leave you. It's as if the place erased itself from time, but forgot to erase you. This is not a memory. It's the ghost of one. A haunting whisper of a moment that once happened and now refuses to explain itself. The forgotten room syndrome is not fiction. It's a very real cognitive experience, where your mind holds on to the atmosphere, the feeling, the psychological imprint of a place, but cannot retrieve any details. No story. No people. Just the leftover emotion of having been somewhere significant, but with no proof. The human brain doesn't record memory like a camera. It stores fragments, emotional peaks, spatial layouts, sounds, associations. But sometimes, a space gets encoded emotionally without being stored as a visual or narrative event. And when you recall it later, all that remains is sensation, a feeling that floods you without context. You know you've been there, but that's all you know, and it feels like madness. You might be walking through a building and suddenly feel breathless. You pause. You look around. The angles of the walls, the light coming through the curtains, the echo of your footsteps. It's familiar, painfully familiar, but your conscious mind can't retrieve any memory to explain it. It feels like déjà vu, but deeper, heavier, more rooted in something real that refuses to come back. This is what makes the syndrome so eerie. It's not a glitch. It's not a false memory. It's real, but disconnected. The hippocampus, the brain's memory encoder, sometimes saves the emotional imprint of a place before it ever saves the story. If something deeply emotional happened in a location, even just once, your body remembers it, even if your mind lets it go. And sometimes, that's intentional, because not all forgotten rooms are just forgotten. Some are buried. A hospital waiting room. A room in which bad news was delivered. A motel hallway tied to something you never processed. A childhood space in which something changed, suddenly, silently. The mind, in its attempt to protect, can suppress not just the memory, but the location itself. It removes the story, but leaves behind the emotional architecture. There's a name for this in trauma psychology: place-based amnesia. The person forgets the details of what happened, but the location triggers the feeling. A therapist's office you can't enter. A school hallway that makes you dizzy. A bedroom that feels sacred or cursed, even if you don't remember why. The room lives in your emotional memory like a silent witness. Unchallenged, unnamed, but powerful. And what's worse is that sometimes the room isn't even real anymore. Maybe the building was torn down. Maybe you only visited it once, in a state of stress or illness or exhaustion. Maybe it was a dream or a place from early childhood, so far back it wasn't verbalized. But the body doesn't care. When it recognizes that feeling again, maybe through a smell or a sound or the color of light at a certain hour, it responds, as if that room still exists, as if part of you is still standing inside it. Some people try to chase the memory. They search photos, maps, travel histories. They call family members to ask, "Did we ever go to a place like this?" But the answers don't come, because the room exists outside the narrative. It's an emotional artifact floating in time, disconnected from names and dates. You can't find it in your phone gallery. It's not geotagged. It's hidden in the folds between memory and feeling, but the impact is real. The forgotten room syndrome affects how we relate to the world. You may find yourself avoiding certain corridors, choosing one seat over another, feeling strangely calm or unnerved in certain types of buildings. You won't know why. But your body is navigating a map of places that once mattered deeply, even if your mind doesn't remember the paths. And here's the part no one talks about. Sometimes the forgotten room wasn't yours. It was someone else's. You were a visitor, maybe just once. And yet, their emotions soaked the room like perfume. People leave imprints in space. If you walked into a room where someone had cried all night or confessed something unspoken, the emotional atmosphere may have embedded itself in your memory. Not the conversation, not the name, just the feeling that something happened there. And now, it follows you. It gets even more surreal when dreams enter the picture. because the brain doesn't separate the architecture of dreams from that of real places. You may have dreamt a room again and again across years, each time slightly different, always incomplete. But it feels like it exists somewhere in the waking world. You're convinced you've been there, and you have, but only in sleep. Yet the brain logs it as a real emotional space, and so you search. You walk into real places hoping to find it, but it never quite matches. And that longing, that echo, never fades. Why does this matter? Because the rooms we forget shape us as much as the ones we remember. They are the silent chapters in our autobiography. They contain the emotional data without the story. And when those feelings arise, without warning, without explanation, we doubt ourselves. We feel irrational, broken. But we are not. We are human. And the way we store memory is both fragile and profound. If you've ever cried without knowing why, or walked into a place and felt like your soul tightened, or dreamed of a hallway that feels more familiar than your own bedroom, you're not alone. You're not crazy. You've simply encountered one of your forgotten rooms, a space that changed you quietly and then vanished into the background of your life. It's still there somewhere, in the neural lattice of your emotional memory, not waiting to be found, not begging for resolution, just there, haunting you not with terror, but with mystery. The kind of mystery that never fully leaves, because part of you is still walking out of that door, looking back, wondering what it meant, and why it mattered so much. And maybe you'll never know. Maybe that's the curse of it. But maybe it's also the gift, a reminder that not all truths come in language. Some arrive in the way a room smells at dusk, or how light bends against old wallpaper, or how you feel suddenly like you're being watched, not by a person, but by a memory trying to remember you. The vanished year effect. Have you ever looked back on an entire year of your life and realized you don't remember much of it at all? Not because something dramatic erased it, but because nothing did. It simply disappeared. You lived it. You breathed through it. But when you reach for it in memory, it's like trying to grip mist. You know you were there. There are dates in calendars, maybe photos in folders, but the emotional texture, the stories, the days that strung together into weeks, gone. This is what we call the vanished year effect, and it's more common than you think. At first, it feels like a glitch, a personal failing. You ask yourself, was I just distracted, lazy, lost? But the truth is stranger and sadder. Your mind didn't forget the year. It never fully recorded it. Memory doesn't work like a scroll that automatically rolls as time passes. It functions more like a camera, one that only takes pictures when something emotionally intense, surprising, or meaningful happens. And if an entire season of your life passed without those moments, the camera stayed off. Routine is the enemy of memory. When each day mirrors the last, your brain compresses those days into a single mental frame. Wake up, commute, sit at the same desk, scroll the same apps, microwave the same meals, sleep, repeat. At the time, it felt fine, normal, even peaceful, but in hindsight, it collapses into a blur, and when you look back, the whole year feels like a blank. There's a haunting truth here. Memory is not time, it's meaning. And a year without meaning feels like a year that never happened. This is why you remember a single week-long trip more vividly than 6 months of stable work. It's why the blur of lockdown years feels eerie, whole months vanishing behind a fog of sameness. For some, 2020 still feels like it just ended, while others swear they never truly returned from it. The vanished year effect doesn't just distort our sense of time, it distorts identity, because we build who we are out of the stories we can recall. And when a stretch of life has no story, it feels like we weren't really alive during it, as if we stepped out of ourselves, and no one noticed. But this isn't just about boredom, it's about emotional texture. Our brain prioritizes novelty and narrative, a near-death experience, a breakup, a move, a new friendship. All these shake memory awake. But in years where nothing changes, nothing stands out. You may have been functioning, but you weren't experiencing, you weren't encoding. And without encoding, there is no recall. Think about it. Try to name 5 distinct memories from the year 2017. Not milestones, just days that meant something. Most people can't. Now try the year your heart was broken, or the year someone died, or the year you traveled alone. Suddenly, it floods back. Because the emotional weight left impressions. Your memory chose to carve those stories into your mind like grooves on vinyl. But when there's no emotion, there's no groove. The track can't play. And so, the year vanishes. This phenomenon isn't a mental flaw. It's a coping mechanism. In a world of overstimulation, our brain filters out the noise. But the cruel irony is this. The more we live on autopilot to protect our energy, the less we remember living at all. It's also deeply tied to age. As we grow older, each year becomes a smaller fraction of our total life. At 5 years old, a single year is 20% of your memory. At 50, it's just 2%. So even without forgetting, time itself feels faster. But combine that with low novelty, and the blur sharpens. Decades compress. You say things like, "Was that really 10 years ago?" But it feels like 2. That's not time warping. That's your memory skipping over the hollow parts. The vanished year effect becomes dangerous when it repeats. 1 lost year becomes 2, then 5. A decade of fog. People reach their 40s and whisper, "Where did my life go?" It went nowhere. It just wasn't marked. And here's the brutal truth. No one warns you when it begins. It doesn't feel like loss at first. It feels like stability, peace, no pain. But slowly your identity grows brittle because you can't build meaning out of blank space. So how do you stop it? You don't need to chase adrenaline or live like every day is your last. That's unsustainable. But you do need to break the pattern. Small disruptions anchor memory. A different route home, a handwritten letter, a conversation that makes you cry. You remember the day your electricity went out, not because of the inconvenience, but because it made the day different. Even small rituals can break the blur. Journaling, reflecting, marking the start of a season with intention. These are memory flags, anchors that prevent your months from folding into each other. Another key is emotional honesty. Many years vanish, not because they lacked events, but because you numbed yourself to them. You had a hard year, but you didn't process it. You smiled through it. You distracted yourself. And so, your memory recorded nothing, because you never paused to feel anything. Sometimes, the vanished year isn't just the dull one, it's the painful one you refuse to look at. Healing is what gives memory shape. Without it, even trauma can disappear. Not from existence, but from narrative. It remains buried, surfacing as anxiety, fog, or regret. Look closely. Is there a year you never talk about? Not because nothing happened, but because too much did? The vanished year effect isn't always accidental. Sometimes it's a survival mechanism, but survival is not life. To live is to mark time with meaning, to feel something deep enough that the year imprints. You don't need to remember every day, but you deserve to remember enough to feel like you were there. So, take this as your reminder. Life is not about productivity, it's about presence. Disrupt the routine. Let yourself feel the seasons pass. Speak the unsaid. Cry when you need to. And above all, notice. Because in the end, the years you remember are the ones where you were awake, and the ones that vanish, they were lived asleep. So, tonight ask yourself, where did that year go? And more importantly, where are you right now? The memory echo collapse. Have you ever remembered something and then doubted it? Then, in the very next breath, doubted that you ever truly doubted it? It sounds subtle, trivial, but it's not. It's the edge of something vast, an unraveling that doesn't scream or announce itself, but quietly erodes the very scaffolding of your identity. A glitch that doesn't just corrupt the memory, it questions your right to ever have called it memory in the first place. This is what we call the memory echo collapse. It begins simply. You're sitting somewhere familiar. Maybe it's your childhood home. You remember a detail, a hallway light, a voice calling you from the kitchen, a fight you had with your brother. You're sure it happened. The colors are vivid, the sound has weight. You feel the emotion swell inside you. But then, something shifts. A stray thought cuts in like static. Wait, did it happen that way? You blink. You squint inward. And suddenly, your certainty flickers. Maybe your brother says it didn't happen. Maybe someone else insists they were there, and they remember it entirely differently. Now you're not just remembering the moment anymore. You're remembering yourself remembering it. And that version isn't as solid. It's echoing. You hear it bounce back at you from within your mind. Fainter now, thinner, distorted. That echo of certainty you once trusted begins to split in layers. Now you're no longer arguing about the memory. You're arguing about your doubt of it. Did you really ever believe it happened the way you first thought? Or did you fabricate certainty to fill a crack that was always there? The collapse doesn't come like a crash. It comes like silence. The memory fades, but not cleanly. It dissolves into a fog of self-questioning so complete that even your doubt loses a reference point. This isn't about forgetting. This is an amnesia. This is the mind eating itself backwards, collapsing the ladder it just climbed. One rung of recall vanishes, then the hand that reached for it, then the belief that you ever reached at all. The phenomenon is more common than we think. Trauma victims often report it, especially those who grew up around gaslighting, manipulation, or chronic emotional invalidation. They'll remember being yelled at, then be told it never happened. They'll remember being neglected, then hear, "We did everything for you." So they begin to remember through a filter of shame, as if their own emotions are unreliable narrators. Eventually, even strong memories sound suspect, and then, silent. But this doesn't just happen to trauma survivors. It happens during grief. It happens in heartbreak. You remember a moment with someone you loved, a laugh, a shared look, a night when everything felt right. Then that person disappears. Maybe they die. Maybe they leave you. And now the memory has no one else to verify it. No co-witness. No second voice to echo back, "Yes, that happened." Your mind replays the scene, then it questions it. Then it questions the question, and somewhere inside that loop, the moment that once gave you comfort vanishes. There's a term for this kind of mental erosion: metacognitive overload. When you think so much about your own thoughts that the system locks up, the memory itself becomes tangled in a recursive feedback loop. Not what happened, but how you felt about what happened, and then how you feel about the way you felt. You drown in mirrors, no wall, no floor, just the sound of yourself questioning the last thing you ever trusted, your own recall. Now let's push it further. Think about collective memories, cultural ones. Have you ever felt a vivid memory of something from your childhood? A logo, a line from a movie, a public event, only to find out that it never existed the way you remember it? Some call it the Mandela effect. But what if it's not just a glitch in our individual perception? What if it's the collapse of a shared echo? A cultural memory so often repeated, distorted, and reshaped by retellings that even the original vanishes and no one notices. This creates a terrifying realization. Memory, even when it feels certain, might just be the residue of belief plus repetition. And when belief gets interrupted, repetition becomes noise, and noise can't hold truth. So, what happens when your life's most important moments, your first kiss, your last goodbye, a betrayal you swore you'd never forget, start to flicker like this? You go to replay them in your mind, and it's like playing a record that's warped. You hear the beginning, but then it skips. You fast forward to find the part that mattered, but it's muffled. It echoes. It collapses. And then comes the final stage, silence. Not the piece of forgetting, but the hollowness of something erased that still left a dent. Like seeing a painting removed from the wall, but the shadow is still there. You don't just miss the memory, you miss the you who used to remember it. That version of you, who stood in that moment with certainty, is now just a theory. This is the echo collapse. It doesn't just alter your past, it alters the architecture of your mind. You become cautious with yourself. You flinch at your own instincts. You stop trusting your gut, because even your gut has been wrong before. So you say less. You feel less. You risk less. Because if you can't even rely on your own memories, what's left? But here's the twist. The silence it leaves, that can also be a doorway to presence. Because when memory collapses completely, when even your own narrative evaporates, you're left raw. Not broken, but open. It's terrifying, but it's also the only place new memory can begin, not as a fact, not as proof, but as a choice. So the next time you feel that eerie sensation, that your memory is folding in on itself, that your certainty is becoming echo, that your doubt is starting to blur into belief, pause, breathe. Not to stop it, but to witness it. You are watching your mind dissolve a version of yourself. And if you're quiet enough, you might hear something new rising beneath the echoes. Not silence, but space. And in that space, Possibility. The routine time annihilation. Every morning feels the same alarm tone, the same swipe to silence it, the same few seconds lying there, staring at the ceiling, neither asleep nor truly awake, suspended in that familiar gray zone between yesterday and today. But somewhere deep in your brain, something peculiar begins to happen. The brain, designed to record novelty, begins to shut off its recorder. Because what's the point of documenting a life where every frame is identical to the last? This is the essence of what we can call the routine time annihilation. It's not just a poetic phrase, it's a psychological phenomenon that slowly erodes your perception of time. When your days become indistinguishable from each other, your mind stops bothering to remember them. Time doesn't just pass, it vanishes. You don't look back and see a month of life behind you. You look back and see nothing, just a gray blur. Think about your own routines. Maybe you take the same route to work every day, sit at the same desk, speak to the same people, eat at the same cafe. Even your emotions are regulated by the same inputs, the same messages, the same news, the same arguments, the same small victories. On the surface, it feels stable, comfortable, but underneath something dangerous begins to grow. Time compression. The shrinking of days into moments, weeks into the sensation of a single uneventful day. Memory is not recorded like a video camera. It's stored in fragments, triggered by emotional spikes, novelty, stress, or meaningful change. But in routine, the spikes disappear. No event stands out. So your brain, trying to be efficient, just skips the recording. That's why you look back on a routine period and feel as though nothing happened. It's not the time passed quickly. It's that your mind deleted the files. Psychologists have studied this effect in people working repetitive jobs. Factory workers, security guards, data entry professionals. Many of them report a strange detachment from time. They can't recall specific days or events from entire months. All they remember are occasional fragments, like a broken light bulb or a brief power outage, moments that disrupted the rhythm, because only disruption gets remembered. But it's not limited to factories or dull offices. It can happen to anyone. Have you ever felt like a whole season just disappeared? Like winter arrived and left and you have no memory of how? No mental anchor to hold on to? You check your calendar and realize, yes, those months did happen, but your memory protests. It doesn't feel like it. It feels like you jumped. It's terrifying when you realize this isn't just forgetfulness. It's structural, neurological. Repetition dulls memory, and dulled memory destroys time. This is why childhood felt so long. Every year was bursting with firsts. First day of school, first friends, first losses, first dreams. Novelty stretched time like warm dough. But adulthood, you wake, you work, you sleep, repeat. And your brain, evolutionarily wired to filter out redundancy, hits mute. In one study, participants who spent a day exploring a new city recalled that day as feeling longer and fuller than a day spent at home. Even if the home day involved more activities, the novelty created more memory markers. More memory equals more perceived time. Less memory equals a collapsed timeline. It's like driving. When you first learn, every second demands attention. The mirrors, the sounds, the curves in the road. But months later, you drive the same route and arrive without remembering how. The trip vanished. Not because it didn't happen, but because it offered your brain nothing new to chew on. This is routine time annihilation at work, deleting the ordinary. And there's something darker beneath this. If your brain stops remembering your days, then do those days count? Did they exist, if you cannot recall them? This is more than a philosophical question. It's existential, because your sense of self is stitched together by memory. If memory fades, identity thins, and time becomes a ghost, a shape you feel brushing past you, but never grasp. Now ask yourself, how many days have you truly lived this year? Not in the technical sense, but in the way your mind would confirm. Yes, that day was mine. That hour was real. If the answer frightens you, it should. Because this effect doesn't slow down. It accelerates. The more routine your life becomes, the faster time collapses. This is why the older you get, the quicker time seems to move. Because your novelty ratio has dropped, your mind is conserving energy by discarding the mundane. We don't talk about this enough because routine is often seen as safe, as responsible, but safety has a cost. predictability has a price, and that price is temporal amnesia, a soft erasure of who you were and how long you've been here. You exist in name, but not in detail. You have time, but not presence. There's a subtle tragedy in realizing that your own brain may be the one compressing your life story into a footnote. That, in its effort to protect you from overload, it may be erasing you from your own timeline. You weren't idle. You weren't lazy. You were just unmemorable to your own mind. But awareness is a kind of rescue, because now that you see the trap, you can push back. Not with grand changes or reckless decisions, but with small intentional ruptures. Take a different route to work. Speak to someone new. Rearrange your room. Learn something unexpected. Even the smallest novelty rewires the way your brain codes time. It anchors memory. It slows perception. It restores weight to the moment. Even rituals, if done with awareness, can break the annihilation loop. Lighting a candle before writing. Walking barefoot in the grass once a week. Trying to remember the exact color of the sky at noon. These are not just acts. They are timestamps, memory anchors. There's no escaping routine entirely. Life demands it, but you can refuse to be swallowed by it. You can leave breadcrumbs in your mind, so when you look back, you don't just see gray fog. You see moments, shapes, emotions, a life. Time is not a river. It's a sculpture, and every act of attention is a chisel. If your days have become weightless, meaningless, erased, it's not too late to carve detail back into them, because time isn't vanishing. You are simply forgetting to notice that it ever passed. So the next time you feel like months are vanishing, stop. Break the rhythm. Inject meaning. Mark the hour. Because if you don't, you may look back one day and realize you lived for years in a single unremembered minute, and by then, it will be too late to rewind. The deleted first encounter. You met them once. You know you did. There's no doubt in your mind that your paths crossed, maybe briefly, maybe meaningfully, but it happened. You're certain. And yet, if someone asked you what their face looked like, there's nothing. Just a vague contour of a presence. Ask yourself what they said to you the first time. Your brain stalls. There's no dialogue, no laugh, no image you can summon. The whole moment feels like a corrupted video file, once vivid, now full of static. But then something strange happens. Their name comes up, years later, and something deep inside you reacts. Not recognition, not quite. It's more primal, like a tremor inside memory itself. A subconscious flinch, a wordless tug from a past you can no longer verify. This is what we call the deleted first encounter. A moment that existed, because your body says it did, because your instincts respond, but a moment that your conscious mind has completely erased, and yet, its consequences echo forward. Even without images, without language, without dates, your nervous system remembers. This is not just forgetfulness. This is not ordinary memory loss. This is something else, something buried, sealed, but never completely gone. Think about someone you once cared for, someone who eventually became a chapter in your story. Maybe they broke your heart. Maybe they healed it. Maybe they changed your life. But now, try to remember the very first words they ever spoke to you. Do you remember? The setting, the tone, the exact words? Most people don't. Most people remember a feeling, a smile, a shared laugh, an atmosphere, but not the moment itself. It's as if our minds prioritize the arc of the story and casually delete the prologue. But sometimes it's not so innocent. Sometimes you meet someone who later becomes a source of trauma, and the mind, in its desperate need to protect you, deletes that first encounter entirely. Your memory sanitizes the record, scrubbing away the doorway through which that person entered your life. Not because it never mattered, but because it mattered too much. There are people whose voices will still send a chill down your spine, even if you can't recall their words. There are names that set off a tightening in your stomach, a hesitation in your breath, a moment of emotional static, and you can't explain why. You tell yourself it's irrational, that you're overreacting. But the body doesn't lie. What you've forgotten consciously still exists in your neurological signature. That first meeting may be gone in words and visuals, but the emotional blueprint remains etched into your subconscious. Neuroscientists have a term for this: implicit memory. These are memories you can't consciously recall, but they shape your reactions, your preferences, your fears. Implicit memory is the reason you might avoid someone without knowing why, or trust someone instantly for reasons you can't articulate. It's not magic. It's the residue of experience buried so deeply you no longer have access to it. But sometimes, these deleted first encounters aren't tied to trauma. Sometimes, they're tied to beauty. A flash of connection you didn't recognize at the time. A spark that didn't register until much later. Maybe you met someone briefly. A stranger on a train, a passing face in a hallway, someone who handed you something or asked you a simple question. And then months or years pass, and that person becomes important. A friend, a partner, a collaborator. But the first meeting? Gone. You ask each other, when did we actually first meet? And neither of you can recall. Yet your story has already begun. It's as if the memory gets overwritten by the significance of what follows. Like the mind decides, that moment doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what happened after. So it's deleted. Not by damage, but by narrative efficiency, the way an author edits the first draft of a novel and cuts out the first paragraph. The story works better without it, but it still existed. And then there's the most haunting variation of all, when someone tells you that they met you once, but you don't remember them. They remember what you were wearing. They remember what you said. They remember that you smiled at them in a way that meant something, but for you, there's nothing. A black hole where their story begins, and suddenly, you become their deleted first encounter. You are the ghost in someone else's origin story, the erased stranger who left a permanent mark. It makes you wonder, how many of your defining moments began in a scene you no longer possess? How many of your deepest entanglements started with a single word, a glance, a choice that has now been swallowed by time? These moments matter. They shaped you, even if your memory insists they never occurred. There's an unsettling truth buried here. Not all lost memories are lost because they faded. Some were taken by trauma, by stress, by emotional overload. Your brain performs triage, deciding what to preserve and what to burn. And it often chooses to preserve the outcome while letting the entrance dissolve, like a hallway that crumbles after you pass through it, never to be retraced. But the emotional residue remains. That's why someone's name can stir you even when their face doesn't. Why a song, a smell, a texture can make your throat tighten, even though you can't explain why. Somewhere in the deep neural webbing of your past, the encounter still echoes. Not in words, not in pictures, but in response. This is the paradox of human memory. The things we forget still hurt us. The faces we erase still haunt us. The people we claim not to know can still collapse us with a glance. Because memory is not a vault. It's a living organism. It's fragile, selective, and brutally efficient. And sometimes, it deletes the first chapter so we can survive the last one. So, the next time you feel something stir when you hear a name, when you catch a glimpse of someone who feels too familiar, when your chest tightens for no reason you can justify, don't dismiss it. It might be your body reacting to a file that was deleted for your own good. A first meeting that shaped you more than you'll ever realize. A moment lost, but never truly gone. Maybe you met them once. Maybe you lost them before you even knew who they'd become. But a part of you still knows, still responds, still remembers what you forgot. That is the legacy of the deleted first encounter. The conversation never had. You rehearsed it over and over, in the shower, on the walk home, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling. You played out every word, every pause, every possible reply. You imagined their face, their reaction. You crafted your voice to sound calm, strong, sincere. It felt real. So real that now, when you think back on it, you remember it. Not as a fantasy, not as a wish, as an event. But it never happened. There was no conversation. No moment where truth was finally spoken. No closure, no confrontation, no confession, just silence. Time passed. Life moved forward. But inside your mind, the script kept running, again and again, until it solidified into something that felt lived. And now, it's fused. Part of you believes it occurred. You feel its emotional weight. You sense its aftershocks. But there's no evidence, no memory outside your own that can confirm it. No one else recalls it, because it didn't exist. This is the paradox of the conversation never had, a psychological glitch born from emotional rehearsal. The brain, when imagining a deeply important future event, can encode the rehearsal as if it were a memory, especially when that imagined event is tied to unresolved emotion, love, guilt, anger, longing. The more you rehearse it, the deeper the trace, until one day your mind begins to archive it as something that already happened. And this isn't just a fleeting illusion, it's a full-bodied, emotionally complex memory of something your lips never actually said. Think of the conversation you should have had with someone you lost. Maybe you crafted an apology, or a goodbye, or an explanation. Maybe you told them things you never dared to say out loud. And now, when you think of that person, your body remembers the peace or pain that the imagined exchange gave you. You cry like it happened. You forgive like it happened. You regret like it happened. But it didn't. And this realization can fracture you, because now, when the silence of reality presses against your mind, it contradicts the memory you've built. There's no proof you ever spoke, no confirmation from the other person. Just this aching duality, where one part of you lives in the silence that occurred, and the other clings to the conversation that didn't. The conflict creates cognitive dissonance. Your emotional brain and your logical brain go to war. One says, "But I remember telling them." The other says, "But they never knew." And both are right, from different dimensions. The tragedy here is not just forgetting what you said, it's realizing that you never got the chance, and yet, you've already paid the emotional cost as if you did. It happens often with unspoken love. You replay the moment you told them, maybe in a parking lot, maybe through a letter you never sent, maybe during a quiet walk that only existed in your mind. And it felt real, the relief, the tremble in your voice, their response, whether joyful or devastating. It gave you closure, except it didn't. They never heard it, they never responded, because you never said it. And sometimes, the person is no longer here. Maybe they passed away. Maybe they disappeared from your life without warning. And now, the only way to connect with them is through these phantom conversations. The brain, starved of resolution, creates its own. Because silence is unbearable, it must be filled. So you fill it. With stories, with imagined confrontations, with apologies never spoken, with truths never shared. And those imagined words begin to fossilize into memory. You might even misremember outcomes based on these false dialogues. You'll think, "I told them how I felt and they walked away." But did they? Or did you just imagine that moment so vividly you mistook emotional rehearsal for historical truth? Psychologically, this process is called source monitoring error. It's the brain's inability to distinguish between something you actually experienced and something you vividly imagined, especially under emotional stress. If the rehearsal was detailed enough, emotional enough, long enough, the boundary collapses. The imagined becomes indistinguishable from the real, and yet it never protected you. Because while the brain accepted the memory, the world didn't. The conversation never happened. The silence still stands. The misunderstandings remain. The person still doesn't know what you meant to say. And you're left holding both truths like broken glass, one cutting you with what you remember, the other with what you missed. This is why the grief that comes with the conversation never had is so sharp. It's not just about what you didn't say. It's about what you believe you already did. You live with the emotional consequences, but are denied the actual impact. There's no healing on the other side. No reply. No reaction. Just the weight of words that never crossed your lips. Sometimes, you try to compensate. You write letters and never send them. You speak out loud in empty rooms. You revisit old messages and imagine what you could have typed. These acts feel private, even sacred, but they don't fix the dissonance. They only deepen it. Because you know the truth. No matter how vivid the memory, it only ever lived in you. And yet, strangely, that memory can still shape you. It can give you the courage to speak next time, or remind you of what matters before the chance is gone. It teaches you that silence, when left too long, will speak back in the form of regret. It teaches you that closure imagined is never closure earned, that feelings need voices, that truth, to matter, must be heard. You may never get that chance again. Maybe the window has closed, but even now, you can choose to stop rehearsing and start speaking. To someone new, to yourself, to the present moment instead of the past. Because memory is a powerful liar, but your silence is the truth that still waits to be broken. The erased childhood frame. There's a photo with you in it. Maybe you're smiling, maybe not. Maybe it's a birthday party, A beach trip or a family gathering, you're clearly there, you're the subject. But when you stare into that frozen frame, nothing comes back. No smells, no laughter, no sounds, just silence. It's like looking into someone else's memory, except that someone is you, and that's where it begins. The slow realization that parts of your own life are missing, not lost in the ordinary way, but absent in a deeper, stranger sense, as if you lived them without presence, as if someone else wore your face and posed in your place and left you behind as a hollow observer. This is the erased childhood frame. It's not about forgetting a few details. It's about looking at a moment where your body existed, but yourself did not. You were alive, but you weren't there. You existed, but you weren't encoded. And that emptiness, it's haunting. Most people think childhood memories are warm, blurry collages, fragments that surface when we smell crayons, hear old songs, or visit childhood streets. But for some, those fragments never come. Entire years of youth exist only in photographs taken by other people, for other people. You don't remember how your birthday cake tasted. You don't remember how it felt to sleep in your childhood bed. You see a picture of yourself holding a balloon, but there's no weight to it, no story, just evidence that you were alive. And that's all. Sometimes it's because of trauma, not the kind that screams, but the kind that silences, the kind that makes a child float above themselves just to survive. When the world around you is unsafe, your mind pulls back. It detaches. And when memory tries to form, it finds no one home. So the photo is taken, but the child inside is already gone. Other times, it's neglect. You weren't hurt, but you weren't seen. You weren't abused, but you weren't noticed. The days bled into each other with no emotional imprint. So your mind, without signal or stimulation, stopped recording. You were just there, surviving. Growing up quietly in the corners of rooms where no one asked you how you really felt. And sometimes, it's more mysterious than that. There's no obvious reason, no moment of rupture, just a subtle fog, a blankness, the eerie sense that your earliest self was erased, not forgotten, but never properly written. The strangeness grows when someone else remembers. A parent tells you about a holiday you supposedly loved. A sibling laughs at a joke you once made. You smile, nod, play along. But inside, it feels like they're describing someone else. Their memories are sharp, vivid. Yours are shadows. You start to wonder, was I even me back then, or just a ghost in training? The erased childhood frame is more than nostalgia gone missing. It's an identity fracture. Because if you can't remember who you were, how do you trust who you are? Memory is the scaffolding of self. We build our present personality on the foundation of past moments. We say, I've always been like this, or that's just how I am. But how do we know? When the years that shaped us feel like they belonged to someone else, every belief about ourselves becomes a guess. That's why some people feel like imposters in their own life. Not because they're lying, but because they genuinely don't remember becoming the person they are. They only have proof, photos, report cards, home videos, but no inner experience to match. It feels like finding a diary in your own handwriting, with stories you don't recall living. The pain of this isn't loud, it's subtle. It creeps in during quiet moments, watching an old movie and wondering, did I ever feel this kind of wonder? Seeing a child laugh and realizing, I don't remember how that felt. Being asked, what were you like as a kid? And freezing. Not because the answer is hard, but because you don't know if you ever had one. And yet, there's a quiet strength in this emptiness too, because some people, once they realize their childhood is blurred or broken, start writing new memories with ferocity. They become the ones who document everything, the ones who journal, take photos, remember anniversaries. They live with a hunger for presence, for proof that this time they were really here. Others begin the slow, gentle work of recovering what was lost, not through force, but through softness. They hold the photo and ask, not, why don't I remember, but what would I have felt if I had been allowed to? They parent their younger self in reverse. They speak to the child in the photo, not to extract memory, but to offer memory where none was allowed to form. Sometimes the erased frame never returns, but it doesn't have to, Because memory is not just a record of the past, it's a dialogue with it. And that dialogue can begin at any age. Tonight, look at a photo of yourself as a child. Don't try to remember. Just notice how you stood, where your hands were, whether your smile reached your eyes. Then say something you wish someone had said to you back then. Even if no one took that moment seriously, you can now. The child in the photo may feel like a stranger, but they weren't. They were you. And even if memory abandoned them, you don't have to. The erased childhood frame is not the end of the story. It's the start of a reclamation, not of every detail, but of meaning, of belonging, of truth. Because even if the memories are gone, you're still here. And maybe that's the most powerful memory of all. The dream that stayed, you woke up, and it didn't feel like waking up. It felt like being torn from a place that mattered, a place that shouldn't have ended. And before your eyes could even focus on the ceiling above you, your chest already ached with a loss you couldn't name. You had just lived a life, and it wasn't this one. You remember it, not as fragments or dream logic, not as colors or chaos. You remember details. The apartment on the third floor with the red door, the sound of laughter echoing down a hallway that doesn't exist, the name of a friend whose face you can still see, but who isn't real, the dog that greeted you every day, its fur still imprinted in the memory of your hands, a park, a cafe, a love, all of it vivid, intact, complete. And now it's gone. No one around you knows it. No one lost what you lost. You woke up in your bed, in your own room, and everything is where it's supposed to be. But none of it feels right. The dream is gone, and somehow the grief stays. This is not an ordinary dream. This is what some psychologists call a hyperreal dream or existential false awakening, a kind of alternate life experience so emotionally rich, so narratively consistent, that it doesn't feel like imagination. It feels like memory. It inserts itself into your identity like a file too large to ignore. And when it's ripped away, the mind doesn't say that was strange. It says, I've lost something. Some report this kind of dream after trauma, others after long sleep deprivation. Some say it happens during intense hormonal shifts or deep psychological transition. But science doesn't yet fully understand why some dreams create entire histories, why they give us childhoods, friendships, entire languages, and streets that unfold like places we've walked forever, only to vanish in the span of a few seconds after waking. The pain is real, though, not metaphorical. You're grieving a place you can't return to. You're remembering a rhythm your current life doesn't match. And the strangest part, you miss people who never existed, and the grief feels earned, because in that dream, you loved, you laughed. You maybe even lost something inside it. You had context, purpose. You were someone, fully formed, coherent, meaningful, and now the silence in your waking world feels enormous. What do you call that? When you miss a life you never had? When your body aches with nostalgia for a timeline that never unfolded? Most will brush it off. They'll say, it was just a dream, but it wasn't. Not to you. The brain doesn't separate dream emotion from waking emotion. The chemicals that flood your neural pathways, dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, don't know the difference. And so your heart races, your breath shortens, your stomach twists. You're mourning a ghost reality that no one else shared. And maybe the worst part is this. You're alone in that grief. No one else knew those streets. No one else knew the people you lost. It's not like losing someone in the waking world, where friends can gather and speak their name. This loss is silent, private, and it begins to rot in the back of your thoughts, never fully explained, never properly buried. It makes you question reality. What if that life was real, just not here? What if the dream was a window, a bleed over from another version of you in another thread of the multiverse? What if your consciousness drifted across timelines while your body rested? And now that version of you is grieving your absence, just as you are grieving theirs. These are not just poetic thoughts. Some physicists and philosophers believe in the idea of parallel timelines, realities that split at every decision point, birthing infinite versions of you. If even one of those theories is correct, then who's to say your dream wasn't a brief alignment, a moment where two threads touched and you lived what could have been? And even if none of that is true, your body doesn't care. you're still grieving. You still feel it in your limbs, a kind of phantom limb of the soul, as if a version of you has been amputated without warning. As if your real life, this waking world, is just the echo of something deeper that slipped through your fingers. The worst is when the feelings linger. You go through your day, but nothing fits. Your favorite music feels off. Food doesn't taste the same. Conversations feel flat. Because you have changed. Not visibly, but subtly, profoundly. You are carrying a loss that your waking life can't account for. A loss with no language. And this is the paradox. No one died. Nothing happened. But everything changed. You were somewhere else, someone else. And now, you're back here, trying to pretend nothing's different, smiling through conversations, meeting deadlines, washing dishes, all while your mind whispers, they're gone, and you're never going back. So what do? You mourn. Not loudly, but with reverence. You treat that memory like a scar from a world that once held you. You honor the people, the streets, the moments. Even if they never existed, because maybe existence isn't the point. Maybe impact is. Maybe what matters is that you felt it, that it shaped you, and slowly you begin to rebuild, not by forgetting, but by allowing. Let that dream life become a secret room inside you, a room you carry, a place that left its echo. You are not broken for grieving a life you never lived. You are human. And sometimes the most powerful things we carry are the ones we can never explain. The forgotten identity phase. There was a version of you that no one remembers, not even you. A version that walked through the world with a slightly different posture, a voice a shade softer or louder, a laugh that came more easily. Or not at all. That person once existed. They had favorite songs, small fears, strange fascinations, and dreams that no longer live inside you. And yet, if you try to recall them now, what do you find? Not a whole memory, not a timeline, just fragments, echoes, like a handwriting sample on an old notebook you forgot was yours, or a favorite color you no longer feel anything about. This is what we call the forgotten identity phase, a real psychological and emotional experience, not a dramatic metaphor. It's the point where an earlier version of yourself dissolves, not with trauma or loss, but through quiet abandonment. The person you used to be fades, not because of some great transformation, but because they were never properly archived. They were overwritten. Most people believe their personality is relatively stable, but science shows us something else. Studies in developmental psychology and behavioral neuroscience have repeatedly found that across a single decade, the traits we assume define us, things like extroversion, patience, openness, even what we think we love, shift dramatically, not just due to age or experience, but due to the brain's quiet need for efficiency. It drops what isn't reinforced. Now pause. Think about your 14-year-old self. Do you remember how they walked into a room? How they felt about being seen? What their silence sounded like? You might recall stories or photographs, but the actual experience of being that person, it's gone. That version of you, once so vivid, is now reduced to a collection of externalized images, like a file you lost access to, but still see the folder name. You can point to where they were, but you can't open it anymore. Here's where it becomes unsettling. The forgetting doesn't stop. You are always becoming someone new, but at the cost of erasing someone old. Most of the time, this feels like growth, shedding skin, but sometimes, especially late at night or in the middle of a quiet walk, you catch the ghost of an earlier self, a reaction that no longer feels natural, a childhood song that makes your eyes sting, a memory that feels foreign, not because it's faded, but because you have. And yet, that version of you still made decisions, still suffered consequences, still shaped the path that led here. A person you can barely remember built the foundation of your current life, and now you walk across it daily without remembering the architect. There's a psychological term for this erosion, self-discontinuity. It's the sensation of feeling emotionally or cognitively divorced from your past self, and it's not rare. In fact, it happens to most people without them even noticing. What makes it dangerous isn't the forgetting, it's the illusion that you've always been this version of yourself, that this identity is permanent, that this is the real you. But what if this too is temporary? What if the person you are right now, the one listening to this, reflecting on these words, will also be forgotten one day? Not by others, by yourself. Your current handwriting might look alien in 5 years. Your current obsessions might seem embarrassing. Your deepest emotions might become unreadable, not because they weren't real, but because your future self simply won't feel them anymore. The memory will exist. The emotional code will not. And here's the twist. The forgotten identity phase doesn't just happen once. It happens in cycles. You've lived through several, and you will again. There was a version of you who believed something deeply that you no longer think about. A version who dressed a certain way, loved a certain type of person, feared a certain outcome, and now, they're dust in your timeline. But they were real. They woke up inside your body. They suffered and laughed using your breath. You might find fragments of them still. A smell that unlocks a feeling. A place that stirs discomfort without explanation. A song that makes you feel like someone else entirely. These are the remains. You are the archaeologist of your own soul, uncovering relics of the identities you've buried without ceremony. It's tragic in one way, that there are people we've been who will never get closure, never be remembered fully. They carried pain that was never processed, joys that were never recorded, voices that were never heard beyond their own quiet mind. And they've been replaced by you. But maybe, just maybe, there's a strange kind of grace in it too. Because if identity can be forgotten, it can also be rebuilt. If you can lose entire selves and keep going, then you are not one self. You are a series, a novel, not a single page. You're not trapped in any version of yourself, even the one you're in now. So next time you stumble across a photo, a diary entry, a soundbite from an earlier self, don't cringe. Don't rush to reject it. Sit with it. Let that version breathe again. If only for a moment, they gave you their time. You owe them your recognition, and maybe say this quietly so they can hear it. I remember you. I didn't always, but I do now, because no version of you deserves to be lost completely. Not even the ones that no longer match the present. The role you outlived. You once played a part. Not on a stage, not in a film, but in someone's actual life. A role so specific, so emotionally charged, that it felt scripted by something beyond you. You were their sibling, their secret keeper, their confidant. Maybe you were the one they ran to when everything fell apart. Maybe you were the person who made them believe again. Maybe you saved them once, emotionally, mentally, perhaps even physically. You played that role so deeply, so honestly, that for a while it was indistinguishable from your identity. But now they're gone, not always through death, sometimes through silence, a fading, a vanishing. They left the stage and never returned, and without their presence, the script dissolved. There's no one to play the part for anymore. No cues, no dialogue, no final scene, just an abandoned role with no audience to witness it, and no one to confirm that it was ever truly real. You remember the weight of it, the intensity, how much it mattered. But now, try explaining it to someone else. Try putting into words what that role meant, not in theory, but in soul. You'll find the language collapses under the pressure. We were close, you might say, but close doesn't explain the nights you stayed up comforting them, or the way their voice could unlock a version of you no one else ever saw. We had history, you might offer, but history doesn't capture the way your lives once folded into each other like pages of the same book. And so, you carry a truth you can't verify. You remember being something essential to someone, but now, without them, there's no context, no proof. The messages are gone, the pictures are deleted, the mutual friends drifted, their memory of you, if it exists at all, is locked away in a place you can't access. It's as if your role died with their absence, and in a strange, cruel twist, it makes you question your own past. Was I really their anchor? Or did I just imagine the weight? Was I really their person? Or did I just want to be? This is the paradox of emotional roles. They depend on others for meaning. A hero with no one to save is just a figure in a cape. A sister without a sibling is a title without a witness. You can feel like a lighthouse still beaming across an ocean where no ships sail, still scanning the horizon for someone who isn't looking back. And yet, even in absence, the shape remains. You still hold that instinct. If they called you today, you'd fall back into the rhythm without thinking. You'd remember exactly how to speak to their wounds. You'd remember how to soften your voice, how to hold the silence just long enough for them to step into it. Because the role may be gone, but the script is still memorized. That's what makes it so haunting. You outlived the role. You stayed. You endured. You're still here. An actor left standing in the dark after the play has ended. Costume still on, lines still echoing in your head, but no one left to listen. The curtains fell, and you were never told whether it was the final performance or just an intermission. Sometimes you try to recreate it with others. You find new friends, new relationships, and, without meaning to, you step into old roles, hoping to feel that same gravity again. You become the listener, the rescuer, the rock. But it doesn't quite fit, because those roles were tailored, handmade for a dynamic that no longer exists. You're not just playing a part, you're haunted by one, trying to resurrect meaning from a story that has no sequel. And sometimes, it wasn't even a long performance. Sometimes your role in someone's life was fleeting, weeks, days, even hours, but it was intense. They told you things no one else knew. You were there during a pivotal moment, a bridge they had to cross, and you were the one holding the rope. And when they reached the other side, they let go. They moved on. But you didn't, because you weren't ready. You didn't know your role had an expiration date. And what lingers is not just confusion, it's grief. Not for the person necessarily, but for the version of yourself that existed only in relation to them. That version of you had a purpose. That version made sense. Without them, that purpose has no outlet. You can't prove you were that person. You have no photos, no notes, no testimonials. It's just a vivid emotion trapped inside a locked room where time has already burned the key. There's no closure. There's no thank you, no goodbye, no final bow. Just the eerie silence of an empty stage and the ache of a role you can no longer play. And over time, the question deepens. Not, why did they leave, but, was I ever really who I thought I was? Or did I only become that person because they needed me to be? It's a kind of identity collapse, because when your role ends and you're left standing alone, you begin to doubt whether the role was ever real, or if it was just a projection. You weren't acting. But were they? Were they just surviving? Just leaning on the nearest soul? And now that they've healed, or disappeared, you're left holding the ghost of something they may not even remember. This is the quiet tragedy of the role you outlived, the part of yourself that was built not for the world, but for one person. And now, with that person gone, that part of you has no place to go. It drifts, it echoes, it reappears in dreams or in the pause before a song plays. And it hurts. Not because it ended, but because it can't be proven. You once played a part. And maybe, just maybe, it saved someone. Maybe it changed them. But now it's gone, and no one can testify that it ever happened. You hold the weight of something invisible, and it makes you quietly heroic. Because you continue on. You adapt. You find new meaning. But somewhere deep inside, you still carry the lines. You still wear the costume in your bones. And though the world may never recognize the performance, you were real. That role was real. You were there when it mattered, even if the script is lost forever. The locked timeline syndrome. Something happened. You know it did. You're certain. You feel it in your chest, in your breath, in the way your stomach tightens whenever you think about it. But there are no images, no sounds, no scenes to replay. Just pressure, like something trapped behind glass. A memory sealed in a box that refuses to open. You're not imagining it. This is real. It's called the locked timeline syndrome, a term for when your mind knows that an event occurred, but has denied you access to the details. You're left with echoes, emotional tension with no context, a ghost of a story with no beginning, middle, or end. Your brain, under threat, can do extraordinary things to protect you. When an event is too overwhelming, too emotionally complicated, too traumatic, too destabilizing, it can suppress the sensory elements of the memory entirely. The timeline remains. You feel the weight of the moment, but the content vanishes. It's like sensing that something once stood in an empty field. You can't see the shape, but you can still feel its shadow. People describe this in different ways. Some say it's like knowing a song played, but not remembering the lyrics or the melody. Others compare it to a file on a hard drive that won't open. Its presence confirmed by the space it takes up, but unreadable. What makes it so painful is not just the missing data, but the emotional certainty that the data matters. Think about it. Have you ever looked at a year of your life, maybe childhood, maybe early adulthood, and realized there's a blank spot? A block of time where something feels missing? You try to reconstruct it. You search through photos, texts, messages, but nothing gives you access to the moment itself. You say, I know something happened. I just can't get to it. That's not forgetfulness. That's not distraction. That's a locked timeline. Sometimes you experience it as an emotional landmine. You'll hear a phrase, smell a scent, see a face, and suddenly your body reacts. Fight, flight, freeze. But you don't know why. You try to recall the source, but there's only static. It's not that the memory is gone, it's that your brain is actively protecting you from it. Because part of you, somewhere deep inside, decided that remembering would be more dangerous than forgetting. This is often how the mind handles unresolved trauma, especially events that were subtle, unspoken, or ambiguous. Things that didn't have the language at the time to be understood. Maybe you were a child, and something deeply uncomfortable happened, but no one explained it to you. Maybe someone crossed a boundary you didn't know you had. Or maybe the thing that hurt you wasn't what happened, but what didn't. The absence, the abandonment, the silence. And so, instead of forming a full memory, your brain wrapped the moment in fog. No visuals, no dialogue, just that pressure, that inner tightness, that sense that something in your timeline was welded shut. And it doesn't always show up as pain. Sometimes it hides behind confusion. You find yourself repeating patterns, sabotaging relationships, fearing intimacy, avoiding certain situations, and you don't know why. You tell yourself you're just broken. But beneath it is a locked event, one that shaped you, one that left its fingerprints on your behavior without leaving you the story. What's even more frustrating is how people respond to this. You try to describe the feeling to someone else, and they say, maybe you're just imagining it. Or, if you don't remember, it probably wasn't that important. But you know better, because your body remembers, your nervous system reacts. Something changed you. Something planted roots. And the absence of recall does not mean the absence of reality. In fact, some of the most formative moments in a person's life are the ones they can't fully remember. Not because they didn't matter, but because they mattered too much. You might try to access the memory through therapy, through meditation, through dreams, and sometimes pieces come back, out of nowhere, a sound, a phrase, a flicker of a face. But the image never stays, like trying to hold smoke. The moment you reach for it, it slips away. That's the lock. It wasn't just forgotten, it was encrypted. And here's the terrifying part. Sometimes you don't want to open it. You think you do, you obsess over it, but you're afraid of what's behind the door. Because once it opens, the feelings rush in. Raw, untamed, unprocessed, the grief, the rage, the fear. And even if you gain clarity, you lose the fragile structure that kept it contained. That's the risk. The lock isn't just a failure of memory, it's a defense mechanism, a dam your mind built to keep the flood away. But what if you don't need the images? What if you don't need to know the exact date or the exact words? What if healing doesn't require unlocking? But acknowledging, saying, yes, something happened. I may never know exactly what it was, but I know it changed me. I know it lives inside me, and I'm allowed to grieve, even if I don't have a name for what I lost. Because pain without story is still pain, and silence can be just as loud as memory. The locked timeline syndrome teaches us that memory is not just about recall, it's about access, it's about trust. It's about whether your brain believes you're ready to know. And sometimes, the kindest thing your mind can do is to withhold. But that doesn't mean you're broken. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means your brain is complex, human, protective. It means you survived something, without even knowing how. And maybe one day, the door will open. Maybe a memory will return when you're ready. Or maybe it won't. But either way, you're allowed to feel the weight of it, to respect the silence, to honor the space it occupies, because Even if you never remember what happened, you can still choose what happens next. The emotion without story, you feel it all. The ache in your chest, the tremor in your hands, the heaviness behind your eyes. Grief, joy, shame, guilt, it's all there, alive and raw. But when you search for the story behind it, there's nothing. No moment. No trigger. Just the emotion, floating untethered. This is the emotion without story. It's like discovering a letter with no return address. You didn't invite it. You don't know who sent it. And yet, it opens you. We expect our feelings to be traceable. If you're sad, something must have happened. If you're angry, someone must have crossed a line. If you're happy, there must be a reason to smile. But sometimes, the feeling just arrives, full, fierce, and completely disconnected from memory or meaning. You cry, but there's no scene attached. You feel joy, but can't explain why your heart is racing. You carry a guilt so ancient it no longer has a name, like a ghost that moved in before you could speak, and it never left. This isn't random, it's memory working sideways, because not all experiences leave behind words or visuals. Some leave only emotion, especially when we were too young, too overwhelmed, or too silenced to process the moment as it happened. When the brain can't make sense of something, it buries the narrative, but the feeling survives. That's why certain songs make you weep, even if they're not sad. Why you flinch at a word no one else finds sharp. Why you suddenly feel small in a room that looks just like every other. It's not the present that hurts you. It's the echo of something your conscious mind forgot, but your nervous system never did. Your body becomes a haunted house. Emotions pass through like weather. You feel them, but can't control them. And because there's no story, you can't explain them to anyone else, not even to yourself. This is where people begin to question their sanity. They say, "Why do I feel this way? What's wrong with me?" And when no answer comes, the emotion turns inward. It becomes self-doubt, or worse, shame. But here's the truth. There is nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're carrying emotional artifacts from a story that was never told. And that's not madness. That's survival. Sometimes, the brain shields you from memory to protect you. But feelings aren't so obedient. They live on, waiting, often decades, for the story to catch up. And yet, some stories never surface. Some memories are so deeply buried, or so subtly accumulated, that you'll never name their origin. You just feel their residue, like grief in springtime, guilt on your birthday, dread in quiet rooms. So what do you do when there's no story to explain the emotion? You stop trying to explain it. You start witnessing it. Feelings don't always need a timeline to be real. You don't have to remember the fire to honor the burn. You just have to acknowledge it. Sit with it. Let it be felt without logic demanding a plot. This is difficult in a world that asks for justification. People want reasons, rational explanations. But some wounds aren't rational. Some emotions come from chapters that were never written with words, only sensation. So you learn a new kind of presence. Instead of, "Why am I feeling this?" you ask, "What does this feeling need right now?" Instead of, "What caused this?" you ask, "What can I offer myself in this moment?" Sometimes that's silence. Sometimes it's movement. Sometimes it's telling someone, "I don't know what I'm feeling, but I need you to stay." Because presence heals what stories cannot. And something else begins to happen. The more you allow emotion to exist without narrative, the more your mind relaxes. And occasionally, quietly, the missing story finds its way back. Not always in full, not like a movie scene, but in fragments, a glimpse, a sensation, a face in a dream. And suddenly, the floating emotion touches ground. But even if it never does, the emotion still matters. You still matter. You are not the story you can't remember. You are the human who carried the feeling anyway. That is strength. That is proof of life. That is the soul's memory, deeper than words, older than explanation. So if you're crying and don't know why, let yourself cry. If you're joyful and feel guilty for it, let yourself feel joy anyway. If you're grieving something you can't name, grieve it still, because your heart knows things your mind hasn't caught up to yet. This is not a flaw. This is your depth. And even if the story never returns, you are still allowed to feel. The unrecalled farewell. Someone left. Maybe you did. But what haunts you is not the leaving. It's the silence where a goodbye should have been. A hole in the shape of a final word. A vanishing that didn't echo. And no matter how many times you try to replay that moment, searching for the last glance, the final phrase, the last sound that tied the ending closed, it's not there. You remember everything leading up to it, the tension, the distance, the ache building in the quiet, but not the moment itself. That moment is gone. This is the unrecalled farewell. It doesn't feel like loss. It feels like confusion first. You sit there, years later maybe, and suddenly realize you don't remember how it ended. Did you say goodbye? Did they? Was it a text? A door closing? A breath? You don't even know. And that not knowing becomes a haunting of its own. Because without that final moment, your brain can't finish writing the story. The chapter just tears off mid-sentence. You tell yourself, it doesn't matter. But it does, because the human mind needs endings. We crave closure, not for peace, but for structure. Our memories aren't just archives, they're stories. And when one ends without a final line, the whole narrative begins to decay. You start second-guessing yourself. You wonder, did I say enough? Did I miss something? Did they even know how I felt? It's worse when the person is gone for good, when you can't ask them, when it's too late to hear their side of the silence. It's as if time itself devoured that moment, bit clean through it, leaving a wound where a memory should be, and no one else seems to notice. They remember their own part, but your page is blank. This can happen with death, with abandonment, with breakups that fizzled into silence instead of exploding into confrontation. Sometimes people leave without warning, or with too much pain to say anything. Sometimes we walk away assuming we'll get one more conversation, and sometimes life just interrupts. The phone rings, a train arrives, a door shuts too quickly, and suddenly, that was it. But the strange part is this. You often don't realize what you've lost until years later. You're lying awake, or going through old photos, and suddenly your mind grabs at that ending, and there's nothing there. Just static. A sense of having looked away at the wrong moment, of having blinked while the curtain fell. And that absence becomes its own kind of grief. Not grief for the person, but grief for the ending you were never given. Because farewells matter. They define the memory, a final word, a touch, even a look. They lock the moment in place. Without it, everything else becomes slippery. Were they angry? Were they sad? Were they relieved? Did they know you loved them? Did they care? You search your mind for clues as if trying to reconstruct the shape of a ghost from the dust it left behind. And it leaves you with an ache that feels unjustified. Because how do you explain missing something you don't remember? How do you mourn a silence? There's a word in psychology, ambiguous loss. It's when someone is gone, but not cleanly. Emotionally, physically, or mentally. There's distance, but no resolution. The door closed, but it never latched. And the mind, in its need for coherence, keeps pushing against it, trying to reopen something that was never properly shut. And in that push, memory begins to distort. You start inventing the goodbye. Maybe I said this. Maybe they said that. You patch the silence with guesses, but it never feels quite right, because deep down, your body remembers that there was supposed to be more, a final touch, a held breath, a word that made sense of the whole unraveling. You didn't get it. And now, every time you think of them, your mind opens the same door, only to find darkness behind it. No closure, no farewell, just a question. And that question becomes part of you. You carry it quietly, woven into other memories, attached to other people. You say goodbye too eagerly now, or maybe you don't say it at all, afraid it won't be enough. You begin to fear endings. Or worse, you try to live as if nothing ever ends, clinging too tightly, because you once lost something without warning, and you promised yourself it would never happen again. But sometimes it will. Not because you weren't paying attention, but because not all stories end neatly. Some fade out mid-sentence. Some never had a final chapter to begin with. And that's okay. Because sometimes the absence of a goodbye isn't the failure of memory. It's the proof that something mattered so much. Your mind is still holding space for it, still waiting for a closure that may never come, and maybe that waiting, that space, is a kind of tribute, not a flaw, but a shrine, a silent, unwritten ending that still echoes with all the words you never got to say. So, if you're listening to this and someone comes to mind, say it now. Say goodbye, or say nothing, but say it with awareness, because we never know which words will be the last. And sometimes, the only real farewell we get is the one we give ourselves. The memory that lied. There was a memory you carried like a fragile relic, tender, detailed, maybe even beautiful. You repeated it to yourself for years, like a personal myth. You knew the lighting in the room, the way someone looked at you, the smell of something in the air. It felt undeniable. Maybe it made you feel safe, or strong, or hurt. But above all, it felt true. And then, one day, someone casually said something, maybe a friend, maybe family. They told the story differently, or they corrected you, or laughed and said, "That's not what happened." At first, your mind rejected it, because how could they not remember what you do so clearly? But the seed had been planted, and then it grew. You started questioning the edges of the memory. You played it back and realized you weren't sure anymore. The scene became unstable. The voice you remembered didn't quite sound right. The look in their eyes, was it imagined? The truth you carried started to leak. This is not rare. It is a phenomenon so deep, so unsettling, that it breaks something fundamental in us. The belief that our memories are our truth. The memory that lied is not just a forgotten fact. It's a betrayal by your own mind. Cognitive psychology has long understood this glitch. Studies by Elizabeth Loftus and others have shown just how disturbingly easy it is to implant false memories. People have been convinced they were lost in a mall as a child, even though it never happened. Others remember events from early childhood that their own parents confirm never took place. But it doesn't feel false. It feels like truth soaked in emotional detail. The brain fills in gaps with astonishing creativity. It constructs feelings to justify a fiction. Your memory is not a camera. It's a storybook, rewritten every time you open it. Every time you recall a moment, your brain modifies it slightly. It adjusts based on your mood, your current beliefs, your expectations, even the tone of the person you're telling it to. Then it saves the new version, not the original. Over time, this recursive editing process turns a partial truth into a complete illusion, and you don't know it's happened until it breaks. And when it breaks, when someone finally reveals that the memory was wrong, it's like a floor giving way beneath your mind. Because if that memory was a lie, how many others might be too? You start reevaluating your whole past. Did they really say that to me? Was that moment as cruel or as tender as I thought? Did I invent entire emotions to justify my version? You're not alone in this. In one documented case, a man was absolutely convinced he'd been at a specific concert with a childhood friend. He remembered the song list, the seats, the laughter, but years later, the friend swore he wasn't there. He had been out of town. The ticket stub the man found had someone else's name. The memory wasn't shared. It was synthetic, created by loneliness, preserved by hope. False memories don't always come from trauma or manipulation. Often they're built from repetition. Every time you tell a story, especially one that defines you, you make it stronger, but not necessarily truer. You add color, exaggerate pain, soften edges. Your brain doesn't mark these edits. It just files them away. And sometimes, it isn't your mind that lied. It was someone else who fed you a false version of an event, intentionally or not, and you built your internal history around it. Maybe someone said, "You cried so hard that day," and you believed it. So every time you revisited that memory, you saw yourself crying, until the real image, the real emotion, was lost. Your senses no longer belonged to you. This erosion of trust in memory has a cost. You stop believing yourself. You hesitate before telling stories. You apologize before sharing feelings. You begin every sentence with, "I think," or "I might be wrong, but..." And worst of all, you start doubting your most intimate moments. Not because they were unimportant, but because you fear they might have been fictions. This is not a small crack. This is identity damage, because what is your identity but a timeline of memories stitched together? And if the stitches are false, what's holding you together? But here's the hard truth. Every memory is, in some way, a lie. Not because you're broken, but because your brain isn't a vault, it's a painter. Your memories are brushstrokes, not photographs. And that means they're shaped over time by who you are becoming. That's not entirely a curse. It means your memory is trying to protect you, or help you make sense of chaos. It means that even your false memories had a purpose, maybe to give comfort or to assign meaning to something meaningless. Even the lies were trying to tell you a deeper truth about your needs, your fears, your story. So what now? What do you do when a memory falls apart? You let it go. You grieve it. Like a friend you thought you knew. Like a place you once believed was home. You don't have to pretend it didn't shape you. But you acknowledge that truth is not always static. And that's okay, because now you're awake. You know your mind is powerful enough to lie to you and loving enough to try and protect you. And with that awareness comes something new. The ability to write memories more carefully, to live moments more consciously, to be present in a way that doesn't demand perfect recall, but honest experience. You may never know what really happened that day, but you can still be true now. You can stop looking backward for solid ground and build it beneath your feet. The memory lied, but you don't have to. The dissolved routine spiral. You did the same thing for so long, so predictably, so identically, that now, looking back, you can't find anything to hold on to. A whole decade, maybe more, just dissolved. Not like water boiling away, but like fog lifting to reveal that there was never anything solid beneath it. No peaks, no valleys. Just a flat line of repeated days that looked, sounded, and felt the same. You lived it. You remember working, sleeping, eating, commuting, but there's no distinct memory to anchor you. Just a blur. A routine spiral so smooth, so frictionless, that it left no scratch marks on the walls of time. This is the dissolved routine spiral, a psychological event so common, yet so terrifyingly unspoken. You don't remember the commute. You don't remember what you ate for dinner most nights. You don't remember the people you saw, except in vague patterns like silhouettes passing through the fog. The years passed, and nothing screamed for attention. There were no crises big enough to break the surface, no joys sharp enough to be carved into memory. You didn't forget because you were lazy. You forgot because nothing made you remember. This is what routine does when it goes unchecked, when repetition stops being rhythm and becomes erosion. Your brain, which is wired for novelty, quietly begins to not bother recording days that look the same. It allocates resources elsewhere. It saves energy by compressing thousands of moments into a single generalized file. That time of my life. You can't open it. You can't examine it. It's like someone handed you a sealed envelope and told you everything important was inside, except the pages are blank. You might say to yourself, but I was productive. Maybe you were. You got promotions, you paid bills, you showed up. You did what you were supposed to. But where is the emotional signature of those years? Where's the you that lived through them? The sensory spikes? The mistakes that taught you? The joy that surprised you? If you can't locate any of them, then the routine has done its most silent work. It made you invisible to your own memory. This is why so many people wake up one day, midlife or later, and feel a sense of vague panic they can't articulate. It's not fear of the future. It's grief for a past they no longer possess. A mourning for the years that should have shaped them but left no mark. And when they try to talk about it, all they can say is, I don't know where the time went. But the truth is harsher. The time didn't go anywhere. It just flattened. It doesn't take trauma to erase a decade. Sometimes it only takes routine, the same office, the same small talk, the same weekend grocery trip. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. The problem isn't the repetition itself. It's the unconsciousness. When each moment carries no personal imprint, no emotional signature, it disappears into the white noise of your timeline. Do you remember your 10th visit to your favorite cafe? Probably not. The first visit had novelty. The 100th might have had nostalgia. But the middle ones? They dissolve. Unless someone pierce through the pattern, those moments are unrecoverable. You lived through them, but your brain filed them under non-essential. And that's the terrifying part. You didn't even know it was happening. There's a kind of existential horror in realizing you were awake, but not aware. That your eyes were open, but your life was on autopilot. You made decisions, paid rent, showed up on time. But did you feel any of it? Did anything truly land deep enough to become memory? And then there's the spiral part. Because once a routine starts to erase your timeline, it becomes harder to break. You look around for something new, but everything feels the same. You try to shake it up, but you don't know where to start. The memory void creates a feedback loop. If nothing stands out, Nothing motivates change. And if nothing changes, more years dissolve. More you disappears. People think danger lies in chaos. But for many of us, danger hides in stability. A stability so consistent that we slowly evaporate inside it. We become ghosts in our own lives, haunting cubicles, hallways, familiar routes, smiling, functioning, but unmoored from any internal sense of time. It's not that you didn't live, you did. You were there. But life, when lived unconsciously, doesn't register. There's a difference between existing and being present, between showing up and leaving a trace. The dissolved routine spiral strips away those traces. It leaves you with the shell of a timeline, empty, brittle, silent. And yet, not all is lost. The very act of recognizing this spiral is the start of its unraveling, because now you see the pattern. Now you feel the ache of missing years. Now you want to fight for a memory that's still being written. And that desire, however small, is novelty. It is change. It is the first ripple in the spiral. You may not remember what you did on the 6,000th morning of your career, but you can choose to remember this one. The day you said, "No more dissolving." The day you looked at routine and said, "You will not erase me again." Because life is not supposed to be a seamless blur. It's supposed to be jagged, marked, scarred and joyful, and yes, sometimes painful. But above all, memorable. So burn something into today. Say something new. Break a rhythm. Make a dent. Because one day, your memory will come back here looking for you. And when it does, let it find something worth remembering. The page that disappeared. There's a chapter in your life that isn't there. You didn't skip it. It's not tucked away in the margins. It's gone. Vanished. You flipped the page, expecting continuity, but the story had already moved forward. The next scene had changed. Different characters. Different setting. And no explanation for how you got there. Like time itself deleted a moment while you weren't looking. You try to remember. You really do. You scan your past like a well-worn novel, page by page, searching for where the missing part should be. You feel the gap, a seam, a tear. Something was supposed to be there, a conversation, a turning point, a goodbye, but instead, there's a void. The emotional residue remains. You know a shift occurred, but you're standing on the other side of it with no memory of the crossing. This is the page that disappeared, and it's more real than most people realize. The brain does not record your life like a film. It's a messy editor, it trimming and rewriting as it sees fit. If a period of your life lacked emotional peaks, too routine, too traumatic, too complex, your memory may compress it, or worse, skip it entirely. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was too much, or too little, to archive in conscious detail. And so, a piece of your life gets skipped like a scratched track on an old record. You go from one moment, let's say high school, to the next, let's say adulthood. But in between, a blur. A missing week, month, year. The events did happen, but the story is gone. The feelings are muted. And that chapter in your autobiography is just blank. You might catch glimpses of it in an old photo where you don't recognize your own smile, in a message you apparently wrote but have no memory of sending. You might bump into someone who says, "Remember what you said to me back then?" And you nod, but you don't. Not even a little. It's like someone else was living your life for a while and then gave it back to you with the bookmark moved ahead. The reasons for this vary. Sometimes it's trauma. Your brain, desperate to protect you, seals off time like a burned-out room in a house. You walk past it every day, but the door won't open. Other times, it's the monotony of repetition. Days that looked too similar, feelings that dulled into numbness. The memory network couldn't anchor anything to significance. And so, that part of your life flattened into silence. This phenomenon is common among people who've experienced intense transitions. After a breakup, after a death, after moving cities, you recall what life was and what it became, but the bridge between them feels erased. You try to explain it to others. Something shifted. I don't know when, I don't know how. But I was one person, and then I became someone else, and I can't remember the moment I changed. And that's the tragedy. Because identity is built through continuity, and when a page vanishes, part of you gets lost in the gap. You become the character who wakes up mid-scene, disoriented, trying to make sense of a narrative you didn't get to witness. This is especially true with emotional growth. You might look back at who you were 5 years ago and be stunned, not by how much you changed, but by how little of that change you remember. You didn't notice yourself evolving. You didn't log the shifts in thought, in heart, in desire. You only noticed when you compared your current self to an old photo and thought, I don't even know that person anymore. Because sometimes the page that disappears is you. And no one else will notice. They'll talk to you like nothing's missing. They'll expect you to remember things you don't. They'll ask you questions like, when did you stop feeling that way? Or, what made you leave? And you'll freeze, because there's no answer. There's only that missing line in the story where the explanation was supposed to be. You might blame yourself. You'll think, maybe I wasn't paying attention, maybe I wasted that time. But that's not true. You were present, you lived it. The page just didn't stick. Not because you were careless, but because the mind sometimes lets go of things too quietly. Even worse, it's often the important pages that disappear. Not the birthdays or the loud milestones, but the subtle, intimate shifts. The night you decided to stop loving someone. The day you realized you couldn't go home again. The quiet goodbye you whispered to a version of yourself that no longer fit. Those moments rarely get written down in memory, but they change everything. They're the hinge points of your life. And yet, when you search for them, all you find is a feeling, a soft ache, a wordless certainty that something broke or bloomed, and you weren't awake enough to notice. So, what do you do with a missing page? You don't rewrite it. You don't try to fake a memory that isn't there. You honor the space it left behind. You acknowledge that some parts of your life don't want to be remembered. They want to be felt, understood without explanation, respected, not retrieved. Because maybe the page didn't vanish. Maybe it was never meant to be read with your eyes, but felt in your bones. Maybe the you that lived through it did so in silence, because language wasn't strong enough to hold it. You don't need the whole story to know who you are. You're still the narrator. You're still turning pages. And the chapter ahead, unwritten, uncertain, alive, is waiting for you to show up fully, even if the last one disappeared mid-sentence. The time ghost phenomenon. Sometimes the room feels haunted. Not by spirits, not by footsteps or creaking doors, but by something quieter, subtler. A presence that isn't there, but was. A memory too faint to form, but not faint enough to forget. You stand in the doorway. Everything looks the same. The light hits the wall just right. The air carries a stillness that feels almost intentional. And then, you feel it. Something lingers, a strange ache, a weight, a whisper with no voice. This is the time ghost phenomenon. It happens when you enter a space you've lived in long enough to forget and remember. Not a specific event, not a clear story, just the echo of yourself from a different moment. You feel the ghost of a conversation that changed you. You sense the residue of laughter, of anger, of stillness, but you can't say when it happened, or why it stayed. Because it's not memory, not fully its impression, atmosphere, emotional static. It's not the ghost of a person, it's the ghost of a time. Time leaves behind fingerprints, just like people do. Every moment you live leaves a thin emotional trace. Most fade, some stay, and a few hide in the fabric of a room until something, anything, calls them forward again. A slant of sunlight, the scent of dust, a silence between two sounds. And suddenly, you're not alone. You're not afraid. But you're unsettled. It's not that something bad happened here, it's just that something did. And your body remembers, even if your mind doesn't. That's the eerie thing about time ghosts. They aren't traumatic. They aren't obvious. They're just present. Like walking into your childhood bedroom and feeling 12 years old again without warning. Like sitting in a corner of your apartment and sensing the version of yourself that once sat there heartbroken, long before healing ever began. You don't see anything. You don't hear anything. You just feel it. It's a kind of memory without edges. It doesn't speak in language. It speaks in temperature, in tension, in a brief dizziness that fades before you can grasp it. And when you try to explain it, you sound strange, even to yourself. I just felt something in the room. But what? And that's the mystery. Time ghosts exist in spaces where emotion once pooled too deeply to evaporate. Rooms where silence was thick. Hallways where pacing footsteps wore grooves into the floor. Chairs that still carry the shape of someone who used to sit there every day. But most of all, time ghosts come from you, from the parts of you that once existed in full force and quietly slipped away. You grew, you changed, you evolved, but your former selves never fully left. They stayed in the spaces where they were last felt most intensely, and now, when you return, they rise. The you that waited by the phone in that room, the you that made promises on that staircase, the you that cried into a pillow when no one else knew. You may have moved on, but those emotional shadows stayed, and now they linger, not to haunt you, but to be acknowledged. Because here's the truth. Time doesn't always flow. Sometimes it loops. Sometimes it rests. Sometimes it waits in corners of the world where something important was left unresolved. And when you feel it, it's not asking you to relive it. It's asking you to witness it, to nod, to say, yes, I remember now, even if I don't remember how. Time ghosts aren't memories. They're feelings looking for closure. And sometimes, all they need is your attention. So the next time the room shifts around you, when the light flickers a little too meaningfully, when the air stills as if listening, when you feel yourself drift into a version of the past that never fully left, don't run. Don't ignore it. Just pause. Breathe. Listen. Because you may be standing in the presence of a version of yourself who never got to say goodbye, or maybe a part of you that never wanted to leave. We live in the forward motion of time, but our feelings don't always follow. Some stay behind, looping in soft circles, waiting to be noticed. Not every ghost needs to be cast out. Some just want to be remembered. The rewritten beginning error. You remember how it started, or at least you think you do. But when you try to trace it back, really trace it back, the edges shift. The first conversation you swore you had feels like it came later. The moment you believed changed everything no longer feels like the beginning, and every time you revisit it, your mind rewrites the prologue. Quietly, seamlessly, until you can no longer tell what truly began or why. This is the rewritten beginning error, a hidden fracture in the architecture of memory. It doesn't announce itself with a blank spot or a loud contradiction. It seeps in slowly. It cloaks the truth in layers of new emotional logic, until the original story is buried beneath versions that feel more comforting, or more painful, or simply more narratively satisfying. You don't notice it at first. It begins with a memory you've told yourself many times. How you met someone, how a conflict started, why you made a choice. These moments form the anchor points of your identity, but something feels off. You recall a look they gave you before the words were ever spoken, a decision that now feels retroactively obvious, but wasn't at the time. So, which came first, the memory, or the version of you that needed that memory to make sense? You see, our minds don't record history. They edit it. They stitch events together with emotion and meaning. And if a beginning no longer fits the current narrative, your brain reshapes it, just a little, then again and again, until the memory that once felt solid now feels like a well-rehearsed lie, not because you intended to deceive yourself, but because survival demanded it. Take relationships, for example. Ask someone how they fell in love, or how it fell apart, and you'll often hear a neat, clean origin story. It started when she smiled at me. It all began the day he didn't come home, but press further and cracks appear. There were early warning signs, forgotten tensions, glimpses of beauty long before the official first spark. So why do we choose one moment and call it the beginning? Because the story needs a starting point, and we pick the one that feels safest, or most justified, or most beautiful. But memory isn't linear. It's a river that rewrites its own source, and what you believe today reshapes what you recall from yesterday. This happens not just in love, but in trauma, in guilt, in grief. You remember the moment it all broke, the scream, the mistake, the message that changed everything. But later, you begin to wonder, was that really the beginning? Or was it simply the moment I finally noticed the fracture? And worse, what if there was no true beginning at all? What if what you call the start was only a chapter selected in hindsight, because it gave your pain or joy a neat origin. What if the story began long before you were paying attention? Memory is not a file system, it's a narrative machine. And beginnings are not preserved, they're constructed. And sometimes, they're rewritten to protect you. It's why people can spend years believing they started something noble, only to realize it was rooted in fear. It's why someone who thinks they walked away for peace sometimes remembers, much later, that they were simply afraid to stay. The past doesn't change, but the meaning does. And with each shift in meaning, the beginning morphs. This is what makes the rewritten beginning error so dangerous and so human, because it doesn't just confuse timelines, it confuses identity. Who you believe you were at the start shapes who you think you are now, and when that belief changes, you feel unmoored. You start asking questions like, did I ever really know why I started this? Was I honest with myself from the beginning? If I can't trust how it began, how can I trust what it became? And the answer is complicated. Because the original beginning may be gone forever. Your brain overwrote it, just like it overwrites the fine details of a dream once you're awake. You're left not with what happened, but with what makes sense now. But here's the strange gift buried in that error: the freedom to rewrite again. This time, with awareness. If beginnings are constructs, then so are new ones. You can pause and choose to begin now, consciously, not as a survival mechanism, but as a declaration. You can forgive the earlier versions of yourself who needed a cleaner origin story. You can say, maybe I didn't know why I started. Maybe I still don't. But I know where I am now, and that's enough to move forward. You don't need to remember the true beginning. You just need to write the next line. The vanishing witness problem. They were there. You remember it vividly, not just the moment, but their face in that moment, the way they stood, the words they said, the air between you, the silence afterward. You didn't imagine it. You couldn't have. It happened. And they saw it. But now, they deny it. Not with malice, not even with defensiveness. They simply say, I don't remember that, or worse. That never happened. And something cold coils inside your chest. Not just disbelief, but a deep existential panic. Because if they, your only witness, no longer remember it, then what is left of the event? If no one else recalls it, if no record exists, if the past is built on memory, then has the event been erased? Or was it you who got left behind? This is the vanishing witness problem, a phenomenon more common and more disturbing than we like to admit. It is the psychological collapse that occurs when shared reality becomes solitary memory, when an experience once held between two minds vanishes from one and becomes imprisoned in the other. Most of us build our identity not just from memory, but from confirmed memory, events validated by other people. That's why we say things like, do you remember when? It's a ritual of reinforcement, a call and response that says, this happened. I was there. You were too. We are real. But when someone refuses that call, when they say, I don't remember, or that's not how it happened, you don't just lose their memory. You lose your own certainty. You begin to question your recall, your perspective, your sanity. If they were truly there, how can they not remember it? Were you dreaming? Hallucinating? Exaggerating? The pain here isn't just about being disagreed with. It's about being abandoned in time. Because memory is social. When someone forgets a shared moment, they remove its scaffolding, and the structure begins to collapse. You might still remember the image, the voice, the scene, but it now floats, detached from reality, like an orphaned thought. Sometimes this happens with something small, a joke that no longer lands, a moment of eye contact once heavy with meaning, now dismissed. But sometimes it's something enormous, a confession, a betrayal, a pivotal event that shaped who you are. And when the witness vanishes, so does the story's grounding. The trauma becomes surreal, the joy becomes suspect, and you're left wondering if your entire emotional response was built on fiction. There's a name for this emotional erosion: memory invalidation. It happens in families, in relationships, in courts, in therapy. A child remembers a moment of fear. The parent says, that never happened. A friend remembers a conversation that changed everything. The friend says, I don't recall saying that. And suddenly the world cracks. Not because you need everyone to agree with you, but because you need to believe you were not alone. Let's take an example. Imagine you were once humiliated in public. Let's say during a school presentation. You remember the laughs, the sting, the shame. You carry that memory for years. And then one day, you talk to a classmate who was there. They pause and say, "I don't remember that at all." No recognition. No trace. As if your worst moment was invisible. It's not relief you feel, it's vertigo. Because now, not only are you reliving that pain, you're doing it in isolation. And here's the twist. Maybe they really don't remember. Maybe their mind, unthreatened, deleted the file. Or maybe the event never had meaning for them. Maybe it was just another moment. But to you, it was everything. Their amnesia doesn't come from deception. It comes from disconnection. The vanishing witness problem forces us to confront an awful truth. Reality is fragile. It is held together not by facts, but by mutual remembrance. When the other person forgets, it's not just memory that vanishes, it's certainty. It's the feeling of standing on solid ground. So, what can you do? How do you protect your memory when its only co-owner lets go? You begin by trusting your inner record, even if it's not externally confirmed. Your emotional memory is not invalid just because someone else misplaced theirs. Just because they can't recall it doesn't mean it didn't matter. It doesn't mean it didn't shape you. Yes, memories can be distorted, but so can forgetting. Silence is not always neutrality. It is often a fog we walk into to avoid pain. People forget what's inconvenient, what makes them uncomfortable, what they'd rather believe never happened. But you remembered. You still remember. And maybe that's enough. Keep the fragment. Hold it carefully. Let it hurt if it must. But don't let it rot just because no one else claims it. Not all memories need witnesses to be real. Some are self-authored, solemn, true in solitude. And if one day someone says, "I was there, but I don't remember," you can answer not with anger, but with quiet defiance. That's okay. I do. Because sometimes remembering alone is the final proof that you lived through something real, even if you're the only one left who still sees the scene. The skipped conversation paradox. You never said it. Not out loud, not even in a whisper, but somehow the words still live inside you. Crystal clear, rehearsed, emotionally loaded. You know exactly what you would have said if you had just opened your mouth. You remember the phrasing, the tone, the moment. You remember the beat of silence right before the opportunity passed, the breath you held, the pause that stretched too long, and then it was over. You stayed quiet, and the world moved on as if nothing had happened. But something did happen. Inside you, an entire conversation unfolded in full color. It never reached the air, never touched another ear, but your brain preserved it like it was real. This is the skipped conversation paradox, the psychological phenomenon where the body stayed silent, but the mind kept speaking, forever. It's more than regret. It's not just wishing you had said something. It's knowing you did, in another version of yourself. You can replay the scene 1,000 times, and the words will flow easily every time. You'll hear your voice delivering the truth, or the apology, or the confession. You'll feel the relief of having finally spoken, except you didn't. And that truth begins to hurt in ways you never expected. You remember how your chest tightened, how your heart thudded against the ribs like it wanted to scream, but your lips didn't move. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was timing. Maybe the moment didn't feel safe. Maybe the other person turned away too quickly. Or maybe, deep down, you knew that saying it would change everything. And change, even when it's necessary, can be terrifying. But silence has consequences. Over time, your brain begins to blend reality and imagination. It files the unsaid conversation next to real memories, until even you start to forget which moments happened and which ones only could have. And that's the paradox. You can feel haunted by a scene that never existed. A phantom timeline where you spoke your truth, where you got closure, where something shifted, where maybe, just maybe, you were heard. And yet, in this timeline, the real one, you stayed silent. That version of you never arrived. Now you carry the weight of a voice you never used, and it whispers to you in quiet moments. It asks, what would have happened if you had just said something? It shows you flash visions of how things might have unfolded. It tortures you with what-ifs. Would they have forgiven you? Would they have loved you back? Would they have stayed? Or would everything have shattered anyway, but at least on your terms? The silence itself becomes a memory. Not the event, not the words, but the absence. The missing scene, the skipped chapter, the blank page where something should have been written. You can describe in full detail the weight in your throat, the electricity in your hands, the split-second window you didn't climb through. That's what's most haunting. How vividly you remember not doing something. And the mind, being both cruel and creative, doesn't let it fade. It builds entire timelines around that silence. It simulates how things would have been different had you just spoken. Not once, not hypothetically, but over and over again, like a looping film reel. And even though you know the moment is gone, you still rehearse the monologue, still tweak the lines, still feel like maybe, just maybe, the conversation isn't fully lost. Sometimes, you even convince yourself that you did say it. You feel it so intensely it starts to warp into memory. You think back and feel the emotion as if the words had actually left your mouth. But then you check the facts. You look at the aftermath. The unchanged world. The silence that followed, and you remember? No, you never said it. There's a reason this paradox lingers. Human brains are wired to resolve unfinished stories. When something is left unsaid, it doesn't fade, it festers. Our minds will do anything to fill that vacuum, to create an ending, to insert meaning. But with the skipped conversation, there is no resolution. Just a loop. A memory that grows sharper the more it never happened. Some skipped conversations are about love. You never told them how you felt. Maybe they moved on. Maybe they never knew. But you did love them. At least in that version of the story your silence wrote. Others are about anger. Words you bit back to keep the peace. But now, the peace feels like a prison, and your truth remains unsaid, choking you from the inside. Sometimes it's about apology, a wrong you meant to right, a wound you meant to acknowledge. But the moment slipped, and now the wound has scarred over, but your guilt still bleeds underneath. And then there are the most painful ones. The words you never said to someone who's gone. You thought you'd have time. You thought there would be another day. But now the silence is permanent, irreversible. And yet your mind still plays the conversation like it's waiting for its cue, still rehearses the forgiveness, still says, "I miss you," into the void. This is the power of the skipped conversation. It's not a moment. It's a fracture in your timeline, a fork in your personal universe. And sometimes it defines you more than the things you did say, because what you didn't say still echoes, louder than words. You may never get that moment back. You may never speak those exact words to that person. But the presence of that unsaid truth, it's not meaningless. It's a scar, a reminder, and maybe with time, a teacher. Because every skipped conversation plants a seed that whispers, "Next time, speak." Even if your voice shakes, even if it's awkward, even if nothing changes. Because words unspoken don't vanish. They root themselves inside you and wait, and the longer they wait, the more space they take up. Speak before the silence becomes memory. Speak before the skipped moment becomes your most vivid ghost. Speak before the timeline you could have lived becomes the one you can't stop dreaming about. The self that vanished. You see the photo? It's not blurry, the smile is clear, the lighting's soft, you're looking straight into the camera, eyes open, posture easy. But something doesn't feel right, not familiar, not warm, just hollow. Because that person, that version of you, you don't recognize them, not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually. It's you. But it's not. It's a self that vanished. This isn't nostalgia. It's not the gentle ache of time passing. It's deeper. It's more unsettling. It's the feeling of looking at a ghost that once lived inside your skin, and realizing you don't even remember how it felt to be them. You start to scan the photo, the clothes, the background, the people around you. You try to guess what day it was, what you were thinking, what your life felt like in that moment. But your memory doesn't cooperate. Instead of recollection, there's a strange disconnection, as if that version of you was a character you used to play, and the script is long forgotten. This is the self that vanished, not through death, not through trauma, but through the quiet erosion of time, experience, and change. It's when the person you were disappears, not all at once, but in fragments, a forgotten laugh, a belief you no longer hold, a way of carrying yourself that doesn't belong to you anymore. And the absence leaves a silence that memory can't fill. We're told we change gradually, that we evolve, that we grow. But the truth is, sometimes we shed entire selves overnight. A breakup, a diagnosis, a betrayal, a sudden loss. One moment you're standing in your story, and the next, it doesn't fit. And who you were the day before becomes unreachable, like a closed room in a house you moved out of long ago. It doesn't always hurt. Sometimes the vanishing is necessary. Maybe that version of you was afraid all the time. Maybe they were pretending. Maybe they were too small for the life you have now. But even if their disappearance was a kind of survival, there's still grief. A strange grief. Not for what they lost, but for how far away they feel now, for how unrecognizable your own past has become. This is especially true when you've gone through something that rewired you, a trauma, a healing, a transformation. The self you were before doesn't just feel different, it feels like someone you couldn't return to if you tried, and you didn't notice it happening. There was no goodbye, no ritual, just the slow fading of a voice that used to be yours. And yet, their face is still in your photos, their smile still floats through old memories. People still say things like, "You've changed," and you nod politely. But inside you think, they have no idea. Because it's not just a change, it's a replacement. That version of you is gone. Sometimes you try to bring them back. You revisit old places, listen to old playlists, read old journal entries searching for a bridge, but the bridge is burned. The feelings don't arrive. The memories feel like they belong to someone else. You're trying to access an emotional operating system that was uninstalled. And then comes the question no one wants to ask out loud. If I've changed this much, how do I know who I am now isn't temporary too? What if the version of me I'm clinging to today is just another ghost in the making? That thought can paralyze you, make you want to anchor yourself harder, define yourself more tightly. But identity isn't concrete, it's weather. It changes with the seasons. And the truth is, some selves need to vanish for others to rise. That doesn't make them any less real, just temporary. We don't just outgrow clothes. We outgrow ways of thinking, ways of loving, ways of hiding. Sometimes we outgrow the very self we once fought so hard to protect. And when that happens, we have to decide, will we mourn that old version of us as a loss, or honor them as a foundation? Because that version of you existed. They felt things. They survived things. Even if you don't remember their inner world clearly, they were real. They were you. And they were enough to get you here. Their hands held the steering wheel during storms you barely escaped. Their voice said yes or no when it mattered most. They may not be here now, but they mattered. And here's the part that catches in your throat. Someone else might remember that version of you better than you do. They might still carry your laugh in their mind. The sound of your voice. The way you moved when you didn't know anyone was watching. To them, that self still exists. Frozen in memory. Unchanged. That's the strange legacy of vanishing selves. They don't die everywhere, just inside us. So, if you look at an old photo and don't recognize the person in it, don't panic. Don't shame yourself. Don't chase them. Instead, look gently. Thank them. They were a doorway, not a destination. A necessary chapter, not a mistake. You're not supposed to stay the same. You're supposed to outgrow versions of yourself. It means you're alive. It means you've moved. And if you feel lost now, just know this self too will one day vanish. And that's okay, because something new will take its place. Not better, not worse, just different, just next. And in some distant future, you'll see a picture of who you are right now, and maybe you won't remember exactly what you were thinking. Maybe you won't feel it in your chest the way you do now. But someone, somewhere, will say, I loved that version of you, and maybe, just maybe, you'll smile, even if you don't remember why. The misfiled memory glitch. It starts as a flicker, a sudden image in your mind, a memory you didn't know you still carried. You see the room, the light, the people, even the emotion. It feels vivid, real, but something's off, because you're sure that memory didn't belong there. It belonged in another city, or another year, maybe with someone else entirely, Now you're left holding a moment that doesn't line up, and the ground beneath your past starts to shift. This is the misfiled memory glitch. It's what happens when your mind pulls a scene from one drawer and drops it into another. A birthday you remember happening at age 8 was actually at 10. A conversation you swore took place in a car actually happened in a kitchen. Or maybe, most unsettling of all, it didn't happen at all. Your memory stitched it together from fragments, like a quilt sewn in the dark. And now, you can't tell what was lived, and what was imagined to fill the gaps. This isn't a malfunction. It's how memory works. You don't remember moments. You remember the last time you remembered them. Each recall edits the scene, reshapes the colors, rewrites the dialogue. Every time you revisit a memory, you leave fingerprints on it. So, over time, memories degrade, not because they fade, but because they evolve. Sometimes your brain takes pieces of different experiences, similar rooms, repeated conversations, matching emotions, and merges them into one. It feels real because it's built from truth. But it's a truth assembled out of order. The people were real, the place was real, the feeling was real. But the combination? A fiction? Told so well it fools even you. That's the misfiled memory glitch. And once you see it, it changes everything. You start questioning what you know about your own past. You remember feeling betrayed. But who betrayed you? You remember crying on a specific day. But was that really the trigger? You remember the words someone said, but are you sure those were the exact words? Or just the impact they left? Your timeline begins to blur. And so does your identity. Because memory isn't just a record of what happened. It's the blueprint of who you think you are. And when the blueprint glitches, so does the self built upon it, but it goes deeper. Sometimes, a misfiled memory isn't just a glitch, it's a defense. Your mind might move a painful moment into a different setting to make it easier to live with. You remember being alone, even if someone was there. You remember calm when there was fear. You rewrite the setting, the season, the context, so you can keep the feeling, but hide the damage. And sometimes, you do the opposite. You insert trauma where none existed. Not because you're broken, but because your nervous system felt something it couldn't explain. The event itself was small, but the emotional weight was massive. So your brain filled in a story, not out of deception, but out of desperation to make sense of the overwhelming. It's not always about hiding the truth. Sometimes it's about building one you could survive. But over time, you grow, you revisit, you question. And one day, a detail doesn't fit. A photo proves you weren't there. A friend remembers it differently. A smell brings back a second version, and you're left wondering, which one was real? Maybe both were. Maybe neither. Maybe memory isn't a filing cabinet, but a mirror made of sand, reflecting who you were, reshaping as you touch it. The glitch isn't failure, it's a signal. It shows you where your story has seams, where the stitches were added, where the truth bent, either to protect you or to preserve you. The danger comes when we cling too tightly to any one version, when we defend a false scene so fiercely that we miss the deeper emotion it was trying to encode. Memory is not about fact, it's about meaning. So, instead of asking, did it happen this way or that way, try asking, why did my mind need to remember it that way? What emotion was I carrying? What story was I trying to tell myself? What version of me did I need to become in order to keep going? That's where the healing begins. Not in finding the correct memory, but in understanding why it was misfiled in the first place. You can honor the feeling without trusting every detail. You can respect the moment without needing the timeline to be perfect. Because you are not your memories. You are the presence holding them. And if a few of them are out of place, that's okay. The glitch is part of the architecture. It means you survived. The shrinking significance curve. There was a time when it consumed you. That decision, that moment, that relationship, that failure, that victory. It was the axis around which your entire world spun. You replayed it over and over. You analyzed every word, every consequence, every emotion. You lost sleep. You questioned your worth. Or maybe you floated with pride, convinced that nothing would ever top this peak. But now, it barely registers. You try to recall the intensity, but it's faded. The sharp edges have dulled. The memories sit like distant echoes, blurry and soft, disconnected from the weight they once carried. It's like watching a silent film of someone else's life. You know it mattered. You just can't feel it anymore. This is the shrinking significance curve, a hidden psychological decay that creeps in not because we forget, but because time robs meaning of its gravity. And it's terrifying, because the things that once defined you, the pain, the joy, the sacrifices, they now feel like footnotes. You find yourself asking, was it ever that important? Or was I just consumed by the illusion of now? Here's the truth. Your brain lies to you about how much things will matter. It overestimates the impact of today. And then, slowly, relentlessly, it rewrites the emotional volume. What once echoed like thunder becomes the sound of rain on a window, barely noticed, easy to ignore. This happens with everything. That breakup you thought would end you, that betrayal that tore you open, that job you fought for, that award, that mistake. Even the moments you built your identity around. The human mind is wired for adaptation. What we feel today, no matter how profound, becomes normal tomorrow. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation. But it isn't just about pleasure. It's about meaning, too. Significance shrinks, not because it was false, but because it was momentary. Because we are momentary. Because the self that felt that intensity is already dissolving into new versions of you that no longer carry that weight. This isn't forgetfulness. It's erosion. And it raises a painful question. If everything fades, was anything ever real? You try to conjure the old feeling. You revisit the place, you reread the messages. You think maybe the memories will bring it back, but they don't. Not fully, they bring shadows, sketches, but not the impact, not the truth of how it felt in your bones. And that feels like a betrayal. You were on your knees back then, or you were flying, or both. And now you speak of it like a story from long ago, detached, as if it never truly touched you. But it did. You know it did. So why can't you feel it? Because the emotional mind records experience in fire, and the rational mind stores it in ink. The longer time passes, the more your story shifts from sensation to summary. You remember that it mattered, not how it mattered. And meaning, real meaning, needs emotion to stay alive. Without it, even the most defining moments begin to blur. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Not that we forget, but that we remember without feeling, like trying to grieve with dry eyes, or celebrate with a hollow smile. This curve doesn't just affect the past, it changes how we see the future. Because if everything we care about now is just going to fade, what's the point? Why love if the ache of loss disappears? Why try if the success will one day feel meaningless? Why hurt if the pain will someday be reduced to a line in a conversation? But maybe that's the secret. Maybe this isn't a flaw in memory, but a mercy. A quiet grace that keeps us from drowning in permanence. Because if every feeling stayed as sharp as when it first cut, we'd never move forward. We'd never breathe under the weight of our own lives. The shrinking curve of significance is not erasure, it's transformation. It's not that it never mattered, it's that you've grown beyond its size. Like a child who once cried over a broken toy, you're not mocking your former self. You're simply living in a larger world now. What once consumed you was real, but it no longer defines you. And that's okay, because something else will come. Another moment that feels like everything. Another ache, another wonder, another fire you're convinced will never burn out. And someday, that too will fade. And someday after that, you will thank it for doing so. Because the fading isn't forgetting. It's healing. It's moving. It's life. So, if you're holding on to something that once shaped you, but now feels distant, don't panic. Don't mourn the vanishing weight. It means you survived it. It means you changed. And the fact that it no longer defines you might just be the most beautiful proof that it did. The emotional amnesia trap. You remember what happened. The facts are all there, like bones laid out on a cold table. The date, the place. Who said what? Who left? Who stayed? You can describe the sequence perfectly, almost too perfectly. You can walk someone through the memory like a tour guide through ruins. Here's where I stood. This is what they said. That's when it ended. But there's something missing. Something vital. You don't feel anything. This is the emotional amnesia trap. a strange hollowing effect where the structure of memory remains intact, but its emotional core is gone. It's not forgetting in the usual sense. It's remembering without connection, like finding an old letter written by yourself, but in someone else's handwriting. You know this moment should hurt, or should have felt like joy, or rage, or longing. But now, there's just nothing. No anger, no fear, no grief, no warmth. The facts are there, but they feel like they happened to someone else. And in a way, they did. Because the person who felt them isn't here anymore. You are what remains. Psychologists have tried to make sense of this. One explanation lies in how memories are stored in the brain. Episodic memory, the memory of events, is different from emotional memory. The former lives mostly in the hippocampus, neatly cataloged. But emotional memory, that belongs to the amygdala. And over time, or through trauma, or simply as a defense mechanism, the connection between the two can weaken. Your brain holds the file, but not the feeling. It's like finding a photo album where every picture has been drained of color. You might not even notice it at first. You might tell the story casually, thinking that distance means healing. You say things like, "Yeah, that was hard," but with a shrug, you believe you've moved on. But then one day someone asks, "How did that make you feel?" And you freeze, because you don't know. You should know. But the answer won't come. This is what makes the emotional amnesia trap so insidious. It feels like closure, but it's actually disconnection. The feelings weren't resolved. They were buried, silenced, archived without review. Take a breakup, for instance. You might remember the final conversation word for word. What time it was, what you were wearing, even the smell in the room. But when you try to access how you felt, when the relationship cracked, when the silence began, when the door closed, there's just an echo. No tears, no sharp pang in your chest, just empty clarity. Or think about childhood. Maybe you remember being yelled at, or neglected, or praised. You remember the scenes clearly, so clearly it shocks you. But when you try to connect to the emotion of it, there's a wall. Like your own heart isn't willing to let you feel what your younger self did, because maybe it would be too much. And yet, this absence of feeling is not peace. It's a vacuum, a blank page where there should be depth, and it follows you. Because when you lose the emotional context of your memories, you start to lose your sense of self. You can't understand why certain things still affect you, why some places make you tense, why certain voices make you withdraw. The cause is there, in the past. But the emotional fingerprint has been wiped, so now you're left reacting to ghosts you can't even name. You begin to question your own narrative. Did I overreact back then? Was it really that bad? Maybe it was my fault. Because without the emotion to anchor you, facts feel weak. You start rewriting history, not based on new evidence, but on emotional silence. And that's how the trap tightens. You may even envy the pain others still feel. You see someone grieving or raging and think, at least they can still feel it. You can't. Not because you're strong, but because something got locked away. And now you carry your history like a stranger's diary. Familiar, but not yours. And yet, this isn't irreversible. Emotional memory doesn't always vanish forever. Sometimes it returns in fragments. A song, a smell, a phrase, something small triggers a flood, and suddenly you're back in the moment. Not in thought, but in feeling. The rush can be overwhelming, like discovering a hidden room in a house you thought you knew completely. But more often, it comes quietly, in dreams, in spontaneous tears during a movie, in a conversation where your voice breaks unexpectedly. The feeling is still in you. It's just buried under time and protection and silence. The only way out of the emotional amnesia trap is not through memory. It's through permission. You have to give yourself permission to feel again. Not by force, not by pressure, but by noticing the absences. By asking yourself not just what happened, but how did it live inside me? And when the answer doesn't come right away, you wait. You create space. You allow your past self to speak, not just in facts, but in feelings. Because the soul of your memory, the part that felt love or fear or heartbreak, isn't gone. It's just quiet. And sometimes it's waiting for you to say, "I'm ready now. You can come back." The bones of your story are not enough. Let them be clothed in emotion again. let the soul return, because that's what makes memory real. Not just what happened, but how deeply it once lived inside you. The moment never spoken. There was a moment, maybe just a glance, a brush of hands, a shared breath too heavy for the air. It meant everything. You felt it in your chest like thunder with nowhere to go. You both knew, that something passed between you. A current, a crack in time, a shift in the gravity between two people. It didn't need words, and that's where it began to die. Because you never talked about it. Not then, not after, not ever. You carried it quietly, like a glowing ember cupped in your hands, hoping it might survive the silence. But silence over time becomes erosion. It wears the moment down. It takes the edge off the clarity. It dulls the once vivid details until the color fades and the outlines blur. What was once undeniable starts to feel uncertain, then slippery, then ghostly. This is the moment never spoken. A real event, real enough to rearrange something inside you, but one that was never given voice, never confirmed, never shared in language. And so, it begins to vanish. Not because it wasn't real, but because memory, like flame, needs oxygen. And in silence, it suffocates. You remember where it happened. Maybe the light through the window, the music playing, the look in their eyes just before they looked away. You remember everything, except what you wish you had said, or what you wish they had. That's what makes it so painful. You had the moment, but not the words to mark it. And without words, time doesn't know where to place it. It becomes lost in the archive of almosts. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was forgiveness. Maybe it was a fracture so small you thought you could ignore it. But something shifted. Something passed through both of you, and neither of you dared to reach for it, out of fear, out of pride, out of not wanting to break what felt fragile. But the truth is, silence breaks things too. Slowly, quietly, completely. Because unspoken moments don't just fade, they corrode, they eat away at clarity. You start to question your own memory. Did that really happen? Did they feel it too? Was I just projecting? And no matter how sharp it felt then, the silence afterward distorts it like ripples across still water. You try to go back, but the reflection has changed. You can't see it clearly anymore. And here's the paradox. If you were to bring it up now, it might sound foolish. Too much time has passed. The weight of the moment is now invisible to anyone else. You'd have to re-explain the gravity. Describe how time slowed down for just a second. How the air felt electric. How something inside you knew. But to speak of it now feels like describing a dream. Intense, yes, but unreal. And the more you hesitate, the more it drifts. Sometimes you think about what might have happened if you just said something. Just a few words. Did you feel that? Can we talk about what just happened? That meant something to me. But the moment passed, and now the words feel stranded, too heavy with time to lift. And that weight becomes regret. Not because you did something wrong, but because you never anchored something that could have mattered forever. You don't just mourn what was unsaid. You mourn what it could have grown into. A conversation. A confession. A memory with shape and sound and confirmation. Instead, you're left with a silence that expands each year like fog over a disappearing path. You try to return to it, to hold it in your hands, but it's no longer whole. Just fragments, flashes, hints of a truth that's slipping away. Sometimes it wasn't even a moment of beauty. It was a rupture, a betrayal that neither of you named, a goodbye that happened without words, a truth that hung in the air like smoke but was never spoken aloud. And that too fades, not cleanly, not kindly. It rots in the silence. It festers. Until one day, you forget what the moment really was, and all you're left with is the ache that something important died quietly. There's a lesson buried here. Though it arrives too late for the moment that mattered, unspoken things don't stay the same. They shrink. They dissolve. Or worse, they morph into myths, stories you rewrite over time just to survive the uncertainty. What was once real becomes legend. And legends can't be verified. They can't be healed. They just echo. So you carry it. The thing that was too sacred or too dangerous to name. You carry the moment that once pulsed with meaning, but now drifts like a satellite cut from orbit. It still circles you, now and then, A song reminds you. A face in a crowd echoes their expression. A scent, a laugh, a dream, and the ghost of that moment stands beside you again. Not to haunt you, but to remind you it was real, even if it's unrecoverable now. This is the quiet tragedy of the moment never spoken. Not that it ended, but that it never had the chance to begin. That it flickered in your chest like the start of a new story, and was left forever, as the first line no one ever read aloud. The timeline crossfade effect. There are moments in your life that don't belong to a single year. They float, untethered. You think back and try to place them. Was that before you moved? After you quit? Before they left? Or after you came back? But there's no anchor, no timestamp, just a sensation of sliding. Because the memory doesn't sit neatly in one chapter. It bleeds across time, like two scenes from different years overlapping on the same screen. This is the timeline crossfade effect. It's not about forgetting, it's about blending. You know both periods happened, but they've merged. Their edges are blurred, the distinction between them eroded. And now, when you try to recall the sequence, you can't. All you feel is motion, continuity without clarity. Like a film that never quite finishes one scene before beginning the next. Your brain wasn't built for perfect chronology. It wasn't designed to keep a flawless log of days and dates. It records significance, emotional weight, patterns. And when two parts of your life carry similar emotions, similar people, similar lessons, they begin to crossfade. One timeline dissolves into the next without warning. And you're left with the memory of how it felt, but not when it happened. You remember the conversation, but not which apartment it was in. You remember the pain, but can't tell if it was before or after that trip. You remember sitting in your car, crying, but was that last winter? Or 5 years ago? You swear it was recent. You swear it just happened. But the calendar says otherwise. The timeline's blurred. This happens most often during periods of emotional upheaval or internal transformation. When you go through things that change who you are, the brain marks them not by dates, but by emotional thresholds. That was before I trusted people. That was after I stopped believing in them. That was when I started lying to myself. These are not calendar years. These are identity years. And identity years don't follow the rules of time. The brain weaves stories to make sense of you. But when those stories evolve too quickly or too softly, it can't separate them. So, instead of chapters, you get crossfades. Instead of turning a page, the narrative melts into the next one, and the effect can be dizzying. You revisit a memory thinking it belonged to your college years, only to realize it happened after you started working. You reread old messages and feel confused. Weren't you in love at that point? Didn't that person already leave? The dates don't add up. Because your emotional sense of time isn't linear. It loops, it pulses. It fades in and out like overlapping audio tracks. It's like hearing two songs at once, different melodies, but the same key. And after a while, you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. This crossfade isn't random. It's often a sign that two parts of your life were linked by something unresolved. Maybe you never got closure in the first one, so the second one inherited the weight. Maybe you carried the same loneliness through both periods. Or maybe you became someone entirely different in the middle of a scene you didn't even know was ending. You'll feel it when you walk past a place you haven't seen in years, and your body flinches. You're flooded with emotions, but they don't belong to a single time. They belong to times, all layered on top of each other, like transparent images. And suddenly, you're 19 and 29 at the same time, lonely and brave, lost and found, remembering multiple versions of yourself, each one fading into the next without warning. The timeline crossfade effect doesn't mean your memory is broken. It means you lived through more than your mind could neatly sort. It means your transitions weren't clean, that some endings didn't end, that some beginnings started quietly, and your brain, in its wisdom or its weariness, just let them blend. And sometimes, it's not even your choice. Other people will remember differently. They'll say, "That was in 2017," or "You were already over it by then," and you'll nod. But deep down, you know it's not that simple, because for you, the wound lingered longer. The love lasted past the goodbye, the fear stretched into the next phase, and so the memory wrapped itself around multiple years, like ivy growing across walls. You didn't move on, you moved through. And moving through doesn't respect the lines on a calendar. So, what do you do with this blur? You stop chasing precision. You stop trying to isolate the memory into a perfect box. You honor the way it spilled. Because that spill is your truth. That overlap is your map. It shows you that healing wasn't instant. That becoming yourself didn't happen overnight. That pain and growth are not separate timelines, but two tracks slowly fading into one another. And if you feel lost in your own story, if you can't remember where one version of you ended and the next began, that's okay. It means you've changed. It means you've lived. It means you've outgrown the neatness your memory wanted to give you. So, let the scenes blend, let the edges stay soft, let the chapters crossfade. Because the story is still yours, even if it refuses to stay in order. You kept the note, the photo, the little object that once meant everything. It sits neatly in a box, folded, labeled, preserved. Maybe it's at the back of a closet. Maybe beneath your bed. Maybe in a drawer you haven't opened in years. And one day, you find it again. You pick it up, expecting a flood of feeling, but nothing comes. You stare at the object. You turn it in your hands. You read the message. You recognize your own handwriting. You see the faces in the picture. You know it once mattered deeply, maybe even unbearably. But now, it's hollow, not painful, not joyful, just blank. This is the storage box dilemma. It's what happens when the physical artifacts of your past outlive the emotional connections they were supposed to preserve. The memory didn't fade, it vanished. And now, all that's left is the vessel. You saved the shell, but the soul is gone. We hold on to these things because we believe they anchor us, that the note will bring back the moment, that the photo will resurrect the laughter, that the keepsake will whisper the story behind it. And sometimes it does. But sometimes, the meaning dissolves long before the paper yellows. You don't remember why you kept it. You don't remember what you felt when you did. The photo shows people you loved once, but the context is gone. The handwriting is yours, but the emotion behind the words, unreachable. You recognize it logically, but not emotionally. It's like looking at someone else's life, with your name scribbled on it. And it leaves you with a strange kind of grief. Not for the object, but for the version of you who once needed it. You remember how fiercely you clung to that letter, how you cried the night you wrote it, how you tucked it away like treasure. You remember how it felt to hold that concert ticket in your hand, thinking you'd never forget that night. You were sure you'd always feel it, that the memory would stay alive in the object. But now, it's quiet. The dilemma isn't whether to throw it away or keep it. The dilemma is deeper. What do you do when the object remains, but the feeling is gone? What does that say about who you were and who you've become? There's something unnerving about discovering that your past self built emotional monuments, and your present self can't read the language they were written in. You've outgrown the code. The heartbreak that once shattered you has no sting. The friendship that felt eternal is now a name without a face. The joy you swore you'd bottle forever now feels like a rumor you heard secondhand. And still, the box remains. It's a time capsule for a timeline that no longer exists. And maybe that's the point, because not every artifact is meant to rekindle feeling. Some exist simply to mark that something did happen, even if you no longer remember what it felt like. It's the emotional equivalent of a fossil. The shape remains. The life inside is gone. But that doesn't make it meaningless. It makes it evidence. Evidence that you lived, that you felt, that you once believed this object could hold a piece of your soul. And maybe, in a way, it still does. Just not in a way you can access anymore. The storage box dilemma is a quiet reckoning. It asks you to look at your own emotional debris and decide, is this still a part of me? Or was this version of me laid to rest a long time ago? And the truth is, there's no right answer. Some boxes you keep forever, not because of what's inside, but because of who you were when you sealed it shut. It's a conversation with a former self, a silent agreement that says, I see you, I remember you, I honor what mattered to you, even if I no longer feel it the same way. Other times, the silence is too loud, and you realize it's time to let it go, because the object served its purpose. It carried the weight for you when you couldn't carry it alone. But now the memory it guarded has faded naturally, like a wound that healed without your permission, and that's okay. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means making room for new memories, new meanings, new boxes, because as long as you live, there will be more moments that feel unforgettable, until they're not. More feelings that beg to be captured, until they fade. More versions of you who will try to preserve themselves in letters and trinkets and Polaroids, hoping someone, someday, will understand, even if that someone is you, years from now, staring at a folded note, trying to remember what it meant. And maybe you won't, but you'll know one thing for certain. It meant something, once, and that's enough. The milestone that faded, you did it. You crossed the line, hit the mark, reached the summit. The thing you worked for, trained for, dreamed about. You made the sacrifice, pushed through the doubt, imagined how incredible it would feel, and then it happened. You celebrated. You smiled. Maybe you cried. People cheered. Messages poured in. For one brief electric moment, you stood at the center of your own story, and now you feel nothing. Not because it didn't matter, but because the meaning didn't last. That feeling, that rush of significance, is gone. You try to remember what it felt like. You revisit the photos, the messages, the scene itself. You wait for the emotion to return, but it doesn't. The moment's fire was extinguished, not by disappointment, not by failure, but by something quieter, something colder, time's eraser. This is the milestone that faded. It's what happens when you finally hold the thing you longed for, and realize it doesn't hold you. We're told that success is a climax, that once we achieve the thing, whatever it is, we'll be changed, fulfilled, elevated. But the truth is far stranger. Most milestones, no matter how grand, arrive like quiet footsteps, and once they pass, they begin to blur. You remember them as facts, not feelings. The thrill turns into a story you tell, not an emotion you relive, and you're left wondering, why don't I feel anything anymore? The answer lies in how the human brain processes anticipation. The journey to the goal often produces more emotional intensity than the goal itself. Dopamine spikes not when you achieve, but when you're about to. The brain is addicted to the pursuit, not the prize, and once the prize is captured, the chemistry changes, the high fades, the mind, restless and unfinished, begins searching again. You feel empty, but you shouldn't be. You just did the thing. And yet, there it is. Silence. Not tragedy, not regret, just silence. Sometimes you pretend it still means something. You perform the pride, you post the throwbacks, you say the right words, but inside, the fire is gone, and you can't fake warmth from ashes. This happens in careers. You get the promotion, you land the role, you hit the number, and yet, the morning after, the world looks the same. The dishes still need washing. The light still flickers in the hallway. You're still you. It happens in relationships. You waited for the proposal, the wedding, the resolution, and then it came. But the gravity dissolved too quickly. You're still holding hands, but something is quieter now. It even happens in healing. You get over the heartbreak. You finally let go of the grief. You reach a state of peace and expect to feel more. But instead, it feels like nothing. Not pain, not joy, just the absence of what once consumed you. This is not failure. This is not a flaw. This is the mind doing what it's built to do. Move forward, normalize, reset, adapt. But knowing that doesn't make it any less unsettling. You thought the milestone would leave a permanent mark, that you'd look back and still feel the glow. But time doesn't preserve glow. It preserves outlines, dates, metrics, headlines, and even those fade eventually. So what do you do when the moment that once felt like everything becomes emotionally invisible? You reflect. Not to recapture the feeling, but to understand its transience. You ask yourself, was the milestone the point, or was it who I became on the way there? Because here's the truth. Milestones fade because they were never meant to hold your identity. They're markers, not definitions. They tell you where you've been, not who you are. And the fact that you no longer feel their fire doesn't mean they were meaningless. It means you've changed, grown, moved beyond. The mountain doesn't mourn the echo once the shout is gone. It simply waits for the next step. And so do you. You don't have to chase the next goal out of emptiness. You can chase it from awareness, knowing that the feeling may not last, but the movement will, the process, the striving, the becoming. So if you've hit a goal and feel numb. Don't panic. That moment mattered. It shaped you. It passed through you like lightning. And now, it lives not in your emotions, but in your architecture. The milestone faded. But you didn't. You're still here. And the next chapter is already unfolding. The sleep-loss blackout. You stayed awake too long. Maybe it was for work. Maybe it was stress. Maybe insomnia kept its cold hand on your chest and refused to let go. Whatever the reason, you didn't sleep. Not enough to dream. Not enough to remember. Just enough to function, barely. And then the days started blending, one into the next. You woke up. You moved. You did the things you were supposed to do. But you weren't there, not really, and now you look back, and there's nothing. Just a strange, sterile void in your memory. A block of time where you know you existed, but you can't recall how it felt. Can't recall what you thought. Can't even say with certainty who you were during those hours or days. That is the sleep-loss blackout. A terrifying, hollow phenomenon where the body keeps moving, but the self dissolves. Sleep deprivation doesn't just make you tired, it erodes the very foundation of your consciousness. Studies have shown that after just 24 hours of wakefulness, brain activity begins to resemble someone legally intoxicated. Reaction time slows, short-term memory collapses, emotional regulation falters. But what's more disturbing is what happens to long-term encoding. The hippocampus, your memory gatekeeper, stops filing away experience. Your life keeps happening. But it never gets recorded. You might have gone to work, had conversations, written emails, maybe even laughed. But now, you remember none of it. Not because it wasn't significant, but because your brain wasn't present enough to witness it. And that is the black hole of exhaustion. It doesn't just steal energy. It steals time. People talk about burnout like it's a fire going out. But the sleep-loss blackout is more like a camera losing power mid-recording. You get static, corrupted files, gaps. You might find yourself saying, "Was that last week or a month ago?" You scroll through messages, looking for timestamps to anchor yourself. You read your own words and feel disconnected. Did I really say that? Was I even awake? The scary answer? Technically, yes. Functionally, no. There's a term in neuroscience called microsleeps. These are tiny lapses in consciousness, fractions of a second where the brain shuts down parts of itself to cope. During prolonged sleep loss, these moments increase. You can be mid-conversation and your mind can simply blink off, returning a second later with no memory of what just occurred. Stack enough of these and you're left with hours of action and zero recall. But what makes the sleep loss blackout so uniquely disturbing is the illusion of routine. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. You weren't collapsed in bed or sobbing on the floor. You were replying to messages, making calls, washing dishes, existing, which makes the inner void feel even more alien. Because how can you lose normal time? Time where nothing bad happened? Time where everything looked fine? The truth is, the mind doesn't just record what happens, it records how it feels. And when you're deeply exhausted, the feeling is nothing. Not numbness, just blankness. A low gray hum, no color, no emotion, no reflection. The self is on standby, consciousness is sleepwalking. Think of those weeks where you can barely distinguish one day from the next, where you check your calendar to remember what month it is, where you find things out of place, food you don't remember buying, messages you don't recall sending, bruises you don't remember getting. Your past becomes fragmented, a series of artifacts without story. And here's the cruelest part. Society rewards this state. You're praised for pushing through, for showing up anyway, for being productive despite your body begging for rest. No one sees the cost. Because the cost isn't external, it's internal. You're losing you. The part of you that reflects, that registers, that feels. You're not lazy, you're not forgetful. You were simply absent from your own experience, and that absence accumulates. Because memory isn't just about recall, it's about identity. If you can't remember who you were last week, how do you know who you are now? If the last month feels like a blur, how do you know if you've grown, changed, healed? Sleep loss doesn't just fog the mind, it disorients the soul. You become a ghost inside your own timeline. But there's a hidden mercy in all this, because once you realize what happened, once you name the blackout, you can begin to repair it, slowly, gently, not with force, but with rest. with sleep, with space, and with something even more essential: presence. Start small. One conscious moment a day, one genuine breath, one undistracted hour. Sleep when you can. Forgive what you forgot. You're not broken. You're rebooting. And one day, when the fog begins to lift, you'll notice something strange. The color will return, the texture, the edges of things. And with them, yourself. Not all time lost can be recovered, but time from here on can be remembered. Fully, deeply, vividly. Because the goal is not to function. The goal is to be there. The alternate ending shift. You're sure it ended differently. Not just vaguely, clearly. You remember the tone, the words, maybe even the setting. You remember how the conversation wrapped, how the moment closed, how the chapter turned. You carry the emotional resolution like a scar that's already healed. But then someone else brings it up. They describe it casually, and their version is wrong. Not maliciously wrong, just different. And suddenly you're unsteady, your certainty shakes, because they all agree, and you stand alone, clutching a version of events no one else remembers. This is the alternate ending shift, a quiet fracture in reality, a moment where your mind preserved an ending so specific, so emotionally final that it became truth, until you're told it never happened. So, what do you trust, your memory or theirs? The human brain doesn't just store events, it edits them. It fills gaps, it smooths transitions, it creates continuity. It is not a perfect recorder, it is a storyteller. And sometimes, it writes a better ending than reality gave you, because the real ending was too chaotic, too incomplete, too unresolved. So your subconscious fabricates closure, a sentence they never said, a gesture they never made, a moment of peace that never really came. But the feeling is real. You remember feeling it. The weight leaving your shoulders, the breath finally let go, the quiet finality of something being finished. And if that feeling was real, doesn't that make the memory real too? It felt complete. And isn't that enough? But now, you're in a room with others, family, friends, witnesses, and they all remember it differently. Maybe they remember a fight you thought had ended in apology, or a goodbye you thought was mutual when they recall it as abrupt. Maybe you believed you'd made peace with someone, but the last words they recall were cold and distant. You begin to wonder, have I invented a version of the past that protected me from the pain of what actually happened? And worse, if your mind can do that once, how many other memories have been altered too? This is not some dramatic false memory syndrome. This is something quieter, slipperier, a defense mechanism rooted in emotional survival. The real ending didn't satisfy the story arc, so your brain wrote an alternate conclusion, just enough to let you move forward, just enough to keep the grief manageable, just enough to sleep at night. And it worked. Until it didn't. Because now the contradiction has surfaced. You've opened the memory like a photo album, only to find someone else pointing at the same page and saying, "That's not how I remember it at all." The dissonance is brutal. It makes you question not just that memory, but the nature of memory itself. If the mind can fictionalize endings, where does truth reside? Is it the facts verified by others? Or is it the version you carried alone, the one that helped you survive? Some alternate endings are small, a relationship that you thought ended with mutual respect, but others recall it dissolving in avoidance, a friendship you believed paused with kindness, but which they remember as abandonment, a life event that felt resolved in your heart, even though no one ever said the final words aloud. These differences don't scream, they hum. They buzz softly in the back of your consciousness, unsteadying your grip on what really happened. And yet, maybe your version did happen, just not here. There's a strange theory that memories might sometimes be borrowed from alternate versions of ourselves. That in another timeline, you did get that peaceful ending. You did have that final talk, that touch, that forgiveness. And somehow, in your dreaming mind or your emotional processing, that version crossed over because it was kinder, more complete, more livable. The question then is not whether the alternate ending was real. The question is, what did it save you from? It saved you from spinning, from waking every day with an open wound. It gave you a shelf to place the pain, a door to close, a sentence that said the end Even when no one else offered it, your mind created grace where there was none. And now, faced with the truth that maybe it never happened, you feel robbed, like someone has stolen your healing and replaced it with rawness. But maybe that healing was real too, not in fact, but in effect. Your brain didn't lie maliciously. It wrote the ending you needed to keep going. And sometimes, that's the only reality that matters. Still, the fracture remains. The unsettling knowledge that your memory and theirs live in separate worlds. And every time you revisit that ending, you'll wonder, was it love or was it longing? Was it resolution? Or just a mirage that kept me afloat? This is the haunting beauty of the alternate ending shift. That even when memory breaks, it does so to protect you. It offers you a version of the story that lets you move, even when the real one left you stuck. And maybe, just maybe, that version deserves to be remembered too. Not because it's factual, but because it helped you survive. The taste without time. You parted ways. You said goodbye. At least you think you did. You remember the setting, the room, the light, maybe the sound of traffic or wind outside. You remember the look on their face, the last sentence spoken, the moment they turned away. But that's where it ends. They never walked away. Not in your memory. Not fully. There's a missing frame, like a glitch in the film of your life. You remember the beginning of the goodbye, but not the completion. This is the glitch in goodbye, a psychological rupture, a fracture in emotional continuity, the moment where departure began but never landed. Like an elevator that dropped between floors and never opened again. You were left standing in that emotional corridor, waiting for something final, waiting for closure to physically occur. But your memory skips. It cuts. And what was supposed to be an ending lingers like a suspended breath that never exhaled. You remember the turn of the shoulder, the glance over their back, maybe even the sound of their coat shifting. But the next image? Silence. Blackness. A jump cut 2 hours later. Days later. And in that skipped second, the finality you needed never downloaded. It's not that you forgot. It's that your mind refused to record the last part. Or maybe it couldn't, because your brain, your body, your soul weren't ready for the full departure. You knew what was happening, but something inside you didn't let it finish. And so, now, years later, that parting still loops. Not as a memory, but as a ghost event. You replay it trying to remember how they looked when they took that final step. How far they got before they turned the corner. If they looked back. If they paused. If their gait slowed. But it's gone. You can describe the beginning of the farewell with surgical clarity, but the walk away? It's a blank page. Your mind drew the door, but refused to show you the closing of it. It leaves you haunted, not just by them, but by the unfinishedness of it. You're not waiting for their return. You're waiting for their departure to complete, for your brain to finally accept that the goodbye happened. But how can it, when your memory still insists they're half there? This isn't a romantic fantasy. It's not hope. It's not denial. It's a glitch, deep and subconscious, where emotional experience and memory recording fell out of sync. Your eyes saw them leave, but your heart overrode the file. It saved the moment before they were gone, because the goodbye hurt too much to store. So, your memory preserved the scene midair, forever unlanded. Some people vanish suddenly. Death, silence, distance. You're told they're gone, but you never saw it. Others say goodbye clearly, but their emotional impact lingers like a scent in the room. And then there are those who do both. They said it. They left. And yet, your memory holds them in place like a photograph that never fades. Always turned, never gone. And here's where it turns strange. This glitch repeats. You find yourself unable to end other things fully. You keep half conversations alive in your head. You rehearse partings you never had. You stall endings because you're still trapped inside one that never finished. And every new goodbye risks triggering the glitch again. The same static. The same emotional freeze frame. Maybe that's why you hold on to objects. Screenshots, messages, clothing. They serve as stand-ins for the moment your brain never completed. Proof that they were once here, that they existed long enough to leave something behind, even if the memory of their exit never developed. You may ask, why does this happen? The truth is, the brain often skips traumatic or emotionally overwhelming frames, not by accident, but by design. It protects itself from data it's not ready to process. So, that skipped frame, that missing walk away, it might be your mind shielding you from the very moment you broke, or the moment they did. And so, you wander through time with a half-closed door behind you, never fully shut, never wide open, just paused. And because of that, part of you remains paused too, stuck in that unclosed circuit, not mourning the person, but the unregistered ending. What would it have meant to see them go? Fully. Clearly. What would it have changed if you remembered that last step? That last sound? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe it would have given your grief something solid to push against. Maybe it would have let the moment breathe out instead of holding its breath for years. But here's the quiet horror. You can't go back and finish the scene. It's not there. Not on any reel. Your memory has cemented the glitch. The data is gone, overwritten by shock, pain, love, or something else too deep to name. And yet, you still stand there sometimes, in your mind, watching the same last glance, waiting for movement that never comes. This is the glitch in goodbye, a lost second that echoes longer than hours, a skipped frame that takes years to fade, an ending that never landed, and therefore, never really left. The mirror life syndrome. You remember being someone else, not metaphorically, not as a passing daydream, but viscerally, down to the voice in your throat, the weight of your body, the rhythm of a world that wasn't this one. You remember walking through streets that never existed, speaking a language you never learned, feeling love, loss, fear, and joy inside a story no one else seems to know. Maybe it came to you in a dream, or maybe it was something deeper, something older, something that didn't ask permission before settling into your bones. This is the mirror life syndrome, when a memory of a life you never lived refuses to fade, when something inside you insists, I was someone else, somewhere else. And I remember. It's not imagination, not entirely. The memory is too sharp for that, too vivid. You recall details that never happened, emotions with no context. You catch yourself mourning a loss that isn't real, or longing for a place you can't name. And when you try to describe it, you hesitate, not because it didn't happen, but because you know how it sounds. Delusional, impossible, and yet, it stays. Sometimes it hits without warning, a smell, a sound, a face in a crowd that you swear you've seen before, though you haven't. You walk into a room and suddenly feel like you've returned to something, not remembered, but relived. And the dissonance leaves you cold, because in that moment, you're not sure which life is the echo, and which one is real. Psychologists might call it cryptomnesia, a forgotten dream misfiled as memory, or false memory syndrome, a hallucination crafted by your brain to fill a void. But none of that explains the grief, the weight, the ache in your chest that behaves exactly like mourning. You didn't lose anything, and yet something is gone. You never lived that life, and yet it feels like home. This is where it gets darker, because once the mirror life reveals itself, your current life starts to feel thin, fabricated, plastic. You go through routines that once felt meaningful, and now they feel borrowed, like lines delivered in someone else's script. You touch the people you love, and the warmth is real, but faint. Like remembering laughter through glass, you begin to question your own continuity. What if you really were someone else? What if consciousness moves between lives like light through a prism, splitting and refracting, catching on different selves in different timelines, different worlds? What if the life you remember isn't a mistake, but a bleed-through, a fracture, a memory from a self that still exists, just out of reach? Science won't give you an answer. Memory is a fragile architecture. It can be shaped, rewritten, invented. Dreams activate the same neural networks as waking experiences. So, the difference between real and remembered is often just the pressure we place on it. But your soul knows. And that's the problem. You don't just remember the mirror life. You miss it. Not like a story, but like a wound. A life that whispered to you in your sleep, and then left without explanation. You wonder who you were. And more frightening, you wonder if that version of you is still out there, living, breathing, remembering you as the echo. And now you walk through your day with a quiet ache, a dual awareness, one foot in this life, one ghost in another. You find yourself comparing the two. This coffee doesn't taste like the one you had there. This sky is the wrong shade. This version of you smiles differently, and you wonder, are you the dream or the dreamer? But maybe this isn't a glitch. Maybe the mirror life exists not to confuse you, but to awaken you, to remind you that your sense of self is not fixed, that identity is a layered prism, and memory is not linear, it's spiral. Maybe that other life was a dream, or a future, or a past you're not supposed to remember, but you do. And the remembering matters, even if no one believes you, even if you stop believing yourself. Because somewhere between this heartbeat and the next, you were someone else. And maybe the truth isn't in choosing which life is real. Maybe the truth is in carrying both. And walking forward anyway. The repetition and collapse, fold. You did it so many times you don't remember the first, or the second, or the 10th. You just remember the blur, the task, the motion, the repeated loop you stepped into without noticing. At first, it meant something, a moment, a ritual, a milestone. But now, it's all static. You can recall the action, but not the event. The repetition collapse fold has taken over. It's a strange kind of forgetting. Not like losing a memory to time, but like drowning it beneath a flood of identical copies. The original moment, once vivid, once unique, was repeated so many times that it ceased to stand apart. It collapsed under the weight of its own pattern. And now, all you have left is the structure without soul, the trace of something that used to feel. This is the repetition collapse fold, a real psychological erosion. It happens slowly, then suddenly. You do something again and again, whether by choice or obligation, and the emotional texture fades, the novelty evaporates. The brain, seeking efficiency, stops distinguishing between each instance. And before long, what was once memorable becomes background noise. Think of driving the same route every day. You know the path, intimately. You could draw it in your sleep, but try to recall Tuesday's drive, or the one before that, or last Thursday. Can you? Probably not, because repetition eroded the individuality of each event. You remember the route, not a drive. The memory became a template, interchangeable, empty. This collapse happens not only with actions, but with people, with places, even with emotions. That smile you used to look forward to becomes a symbol, not a signal. That conversation you've had 50 times no longer leaves a trace. It's not that it doesn't matter, it's that your brain has stopped assigning it memory value, like re-recording over a VHS tape too many times until even the image begins to warp. Repetition is often mistaken for permanence. We think if we do something every day, we'll remember it better. But the opposite can be true. The more frequently something occurs, the more your brain compresses it, the more it optimizes. It saves mental storage by deleting the duplicates. And if you don't actively tag a moment with meaning, it vanishes into the fold. There's an old neurological truth. The brain remembers difference, not similarity. Novelty creates encoding. Surprise creates recall. But sameness? Sameness teaches the brain that there's nothing new to store, nothing worth preserving. Imagine a ritual you once loved. Morning coffee, evening walks, a prayer, a kiss. At first, it meant something. It was soaked in intention. But somewhere along the way, the rhythm overtook the reason. It became automated, hollowed. And now, when you look back on the thousands of mornings or nights you lived through, you can't distinguish one from the other. The timeline collapsed inward. The fold closed. What remains is not memory, but motion. This isn't just a trick of attention, it's a form of temporal compression. The more interchangeable your days become, the faster they seem to pass. This is why time feels like it accelerates as you age, because the uniqueness fades, the markers blur. And in the absence of novelty, time folds inward. A month feels like a week. A year feels like a season. It's not just routine, it's erasure. But what's even more eerie is when you want to remember something and can't. You try to pull it up. A moment from a job you worked for years, a meal you cooked dozens of times, a performance you gave nightly. You know it mattered, but your memory returns a blank. It doesn't say no data, it just loops the default. You're trapped in the fold. Too many versions. No anchor. And so you start to question, did I live that moment? Or did I just repeat it? This is where the collapse becomes existential, Because repetition doesn't just erase memory, it erodes identity. If you can't recall the difference between your yesterdays, who exactly have you been becoming? If every day was the same, then who was today's you? You're not alone in this. Teachers, doctors, factory workers, caretakers, millions fall into this fold. Not because they lack depth, but because their days are too full. Full of sameness, full of duties, full of repeated actions that no longer carry distinct moments. Their lives blur into function. And the tragedy is, they only notice it once they've exited the pattern, when it's too late to remember what was lost. But there's a way out. Not by eliminating repetition. That's part of life. That's how we survive. But by breaking the fold, by inserting difference, small ruptures. A new route home, a new flavor, a different rhythm. Even asking a new question during an old routine can create memory, can slow time, can reopen the fold. Repetition isn't the enemy. Unconscious repetition is. So today, whatever you do, stop once. Look at the thing you've done 100 times. Ask yourself, what haven't I noticed? What haven't I felt? What haven't I questioned? This is how you uncollapse the fold. By adding detail. By resisting the blur. By treating the ordinary like it still has something to show you, because it does. And the more moments you mark, the more you remember. The more time you reclaim, the more you there is in your own timeline. You don't have to live differently every day. You just have to notice differently. That's how memory survives repetition. That's how presence returns to the forgotten loop. Because in the end, the repetition collapse fold doesn't take everything. It just waits and asks silently, were you paying attention? The glitch in goodbye. You parted ways. You said goodbye, at least you think you did. You remember the setting. The room, the light, maybe the sound of traffic or wind outside. You remember the look on their face, the last sentence spoken, the moment they turned away. But that's where it ends. They never walked away. Not in your memory. Not fully. There's a missing frame, like a glitch in the film of your life. You remember the beginning of the goodbye, but not the completion. This is the glitch in goodbye, a psychological rupture, a fracture in emotional continuity, the moment where departure began, but never landed. Like an elevator that dropped between floors and never opened again. You were left standing in that emotional corridor, waiting for something final, waiting for closure to physically occur. But your memory skips. It cuts. And what was supposed to be an ending lingers like a suspended breath that never exhaled. You remember the turn of the shoulder, the glance over their back, maybe even the sound of their coat shifting. But the next image? Silence. Blackness. A jump cut to hours later. Days later. And in that skipped second, the finality you needed never downloaded. It's not that you forgot. It's that your mind refused to record the last part. Or maybe it couldn't, because your brain, your body, your soul weren't ready for the full departure. You knew what was happening, but something inside you didn't let it finish. And so now, years later, that parting still loops. Not as a memory, but as a ghost event. You replay it trying to remember how they looked when they took that final step. How far they got before they turned the corner. If they looked back. If they paused. If their gait slowed. But it's gone. You can describe the beginning of the farewell with surgical clarity, but the walk away? It's a blank page. Your mind drew the door, but refused to show you the closing of it. It leaves you haunted. Not just by them, but by the unfinishedness of it. You're not waiting for their return. You're waiting for their departure to complete. For your brain to finally accept that the goodbye happened. But how can it, when your memory still insists they're half there? This isn't a romantic fantasy. It's not hope. It's not denial. It's a glitch, deep and subconscious, where emotional experience and memory recording fell out of sync. Your eyes saw them leave, but your heart overrode the file. It saved the moment before they were gone, because the goodbye hurt too much to store. So your memory preserved the scene mid-air, forever unlanded. Some people vanish suddenly. Death, silence, distance. You're told they're gone, but you never saw it. Others say goodbye clearly, but their emotional impact lingers like a scent in the room. And then there are those who do both. They said it. They left. And yet, your memory holds them in place like a photograph that never fades. Always turned, never gone. And here's where it turns strange. This glitch repeats. You find yourself unable to end other things fully. You keep half conversations alive in your head. You rehearse partings you never had. You stall endings because you're still trapped inside one that never finished. And every new goodbye risks triggering the glitch again. The same static. The same emotional freeze frame. Maybe that's why you hold on to objects. Screenshots, messages, clothing. They serve as stand-ins for the moment your brain never completed. Proof that they were once here. That they existed long enough to leave something behind, even if the memory of their exit never developed. You may ask, why does this happen? The truth is, the brain often skips traumatic or emotionally overwhelming frames. Not by accident, but by design. It protects itself from data it's not ready to process. So, that skipped frame, that missing walk away, it might be your mind shielding you from the very moment you broke. Or the moment they did. And so, you wander through time with a half-closed door behind you, never fully shut, never wide open, just paused. And because of that, part of you remains paused too, stuck in that unclosed circuit, not mourning the person, but the unregistered ending. What would it have meant to see them go? Fully. Clearly. What would it have changed if you remembered that last step? That last sound? Maybe nothing? Maybe everything. Maybe it would have given your grief something solid to push against. Maybe it would have let the moment breathe out instead of holding its breath for years. But here's the quiet horror. You can't go back and finish the scene. It's not there. Not on any reel. Your memory has cemented the glitch. The data is gone, overwritten by shock, pain, love, or something else too deep to name, and yet you still stand there sometimes, in your mind, watching the same last glance, waiting for movement that never comes. This is the glitch in goodbye, a lost second that echoes longer than hours, a skipped frame that takes years to fade, an ending that never landed, and therefore never really left.